Welcome, welcome. You're here at Arcane Paradox. Today we present to you, what if ancient Goblin-Veela treaty required joint blood test on Harry at age 9 and both nations found 26 lordship thefts by Dumbledore. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Treaty's Teeth. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Petunia Dursley later insisted was the most offensive part of the whole affair. Not the content. Not the official Gringotts seal pressed into burgundy wax, or the fact that it was addressed to Master Harry J. Potter, second bedroom, number 4 Privet Drive in script so precise it looked carved rather than written. Not even the secondary envelope tucked inside, bearing a crest that showed an eagle and a serpent wound around a set of scales, with words in 3 languages running beneath it. No, the Tuesday of it was what bothered Petunia most, because she had her book club on Tuesdays and she didn't need this. Harry was in the garden pulling weeds when Vernon brought the letter out, holding it between 2 fingers like it might bite, his face cycling through several shades of purple before settling on the particular maroon that meant he'd already decided to be furious but hadn't picked a direction yet. Boy. Harry sat back on his heels and looked up. 9 years old, small for his age, with knees permanently grass-stained and a scar he'd stopped bothering to cover with his fringe because it never stayed covered anyway. He looked at the letter, looked at Vernon's face, and felt the specific stillness he'd learned to put on when something was about to happen. This came for you. Vernon thrust it out like he was surrendering it to a magistrate. Harry took it, turned it over, read his name. Something in his chest did a strange slow turn, like a compass needle finding north for the first time. Well? Vernon demanded. What is it? I don't know yet, Harry said. I haven't opened it. Then open it. Harry peeled back the wax seal carefully, because it was the kind of seal you didn't want to tear, and pulled out 2 sheets of heavy cream paper covered in dense, formal text, and 1 smaller card that fell onto his knee. He picked up the small card first. Master Potter, you are required to attend Gringotts Bank, London, on the morning of the 14th instant, pursuant to the terms of the Goblin-Veela Concordat of 1889, Article 7, Section 4, Blood Examination of Hereditary Claimants. Attendance is not optional under the terms of the Concordat, which supersedes domestic wizarding law in matters of treaty compliance. A representative will arrive to collect you at 8 o'clock. Please be ready. Ragnarok, King of the Goblin Nation, first signatory. Harry read it twice. What does it say? Vernon was leaning so far forward his shadow swallowed Harry completely. Harry handed him the card and watched his uncle's face as he read. The maroon became proper red, and then something closer to puce. They can't just, you're 9 years old, you're not, this isn't, Vernon sputtered. Goblins. Goblins sending letters to my house. On a Tuesday. He rounded on the back door. Petunia. Harry looked at the date on the letter while the shouting started inside. The 14th was tomorrow. They didn't stop him going. That was the thing Harry noted quietly, filed away with all the other things he noted and filed. They didn't stop him because they couldn't, and they knew it the way they always knew, deep down, that certain things were beyond their reach to refuse. The representative who came at 8 o'clock wasn't a goblin, it was a witch in precise grey robes with the Gringotts seal on her lapel, who produced a roll of parchment for Vernon to sign before she'd acknowledge Harry's existence, and Vernon had signed it with such aggressive penmanship that he tore through to the table underneath. The witch's name was Miriam Clearwater. She didn't speak to Harry in the car she'd conjured, a perfectly ordinary black car that Harry suspected wasn't ordinary at all, until they were past the motorway and into London proper, and then she said, without looking away from the road, you should know, Master Potter, that what happens today is standard procedure under an 80-year treaty. You are not in any trouble. You are not suspected of anything. The examination is simply required. What does it examine? Harry asked. A small pause. Blood potential. Hereditary claims. Legal standing. She seemed to choose each word with some care. It will take perhaps an hour. There will be representatives from the Goblin Nation and from the Veela tribal councils present. You are permitted to ask questions. Who else will be there? Other children with hereditary claims falling under the treaty. Though, and here she paused again, something flickering in her expression that Harry couldn't quite read, you may find that your case takes somewhat longer than others. Harry looked out the window at London sliding past and didn't ask what somewhat longer meant, because he had a feeling she'd tell him when she was ready and not before. Gringotts in the morning looked different than Harry had imagined, not that he'd ever been inside, but he'd walked past it once on a school trip and stared up at the white marble until Dudley had shoved him into a postbox. In the early light it was all sharp angles and bronze doors and the carved goblin sentries on either side standing with a stillness that felt more like restrained energy than laziness. Miriam walked him not through the main hall but around the side, through a door that blended so well into the marble that Harry nearly walked into it, and down a corridor that went steadily lower and was lit by sconces burning with green-white fire that didn't flicker. He could hear the building around him, the deep hum of it, old stone and older magic, and felt it against the back of his teeth the way you feel thunder before you hear it. The room they arrived at was large and circular. The floor was polished black stone. Around the perimeter stood carved columns, and between each pair of columns a tapestry hung showing different crests. Harry recognized none of them. In the center of the room was a circular table with a basin in the middle, and around the table sat 3 goblins in formal dress and 2 women Harry had never seen before. The goblins he studied first. 2 were clerks, he could tell by the way they held their quills, poised but patient, ledgers open. The one at the head of the table was not a clerk. He was old in the way that meant ancient, his skin like worn leather over very sharp bones, his eyes the color of old gold. He wore a crown that was almost architectural in its complexity and sat in his chair like the chair had been built to accommodate him specifically and no one else. The 2 women were something else entirely. They were both beautiful in a way that made Harry feel slightly as though he'd forgotten a step somewhere and his brain was catching up, the kind of beauty that had a physical weight to it. One was perhaps 40, with silver blonde hair and the bearing of someone who regularly decided things about countries. The other was younger, maybe 13 or 14, sitting half a seat behind the older woman with her chin tilted slightly up and an expression of such deliberate boredom that it was clearly weaponized. Their hair was the same silver blonde. Their eyes were the same gray-blue that shifted toward silver when the light caught. Veela, Harry thought, filing it away. These were the Veela representatives. The older one looked at Harry when he entered with an expression that was professionally unreadable. The younger one looked at him like he was something she'd expected to be more interesting and was withholding judgment. Master Potter. The old goblin's voice had the texture of gravel moving underwater. Please sit. Miriam Clearwater set a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, the first time she'd touched him, and then stepped back to stand against the wall. Harry walked to the empty chair across the table and sat down. I am Ragnarok, the goblin said. King of the Goblin Nation. To my right, Madame Apollon Delacour, first emissary of the Veela tribal councils. Beside her, her daughter Fleur, present as witness on behalf of the younger generation's interest in the Concordat. Behind me are my clerks, Sharpthorn and Griphook. A pause. You have been told this is routine. Yes, Harry said. It is routine. For most children. Ragnarok's golden eyes didn't move from Harry's face. Whether it is routine for you, we will discover. The examination itself is simple. A blood quill, not a punishing quill, a genealogical quill, will write what your blood declares when it meets the diagnostic basin. You will feel a small sting. The writing lasts perhaps 30 seconds. Then we read what was written and answer any questions you have. He tilted his head slightly. Do you understand? Yes, Harry said again. You are not afraid, Ragnarok observed. Not yet, Harry said. Something shifted in Ragnarok's expression, not quite a smile, because he suspected goblins smiled differently than people, but something that acknowledged what Harry had said as a reasonable and honest answer. Apollon Delacour spoke. Her voice carried a French accent and the kind of precision that comes from someone who is always translating and has decided to make it invisible. We appreciate your cooperation, Master Potter. The Concordat requires this examination for any child in Britain whose family has held magical lordship titles in the last 2 centuries. It is not an accusation. It is a census, of a kind. How many kids have been through today? Harry asked. You are the 7th, Apollon said. And the other 6 were, normal. The other 6 were unremarkable, she said, with precise distinction. 1 additional title than expected, in 2 cases. 1 title fewer, in 1. Within the range of ordinary inheritance and ordinary loss. She folded her hands. Shall we begin? Harry extended his hand, palm up, the way Miriam had shown him in the car. The genealogical quill was made from something dark and iridescent that wasn't quite a feather. Sharpthorn drew it lightly across Harry's index finger, a sting, as promised, gone almost immediately, and held his hand over the basin. 3 drops of blood fell into the dark water. They didn't dissolve. They spread, forming a pattern that shifted and moved like something alive, and then the quill lifted on its own and began to write on the parchment laid across the table. Harry watched Ragnar's face. For 5 seconds, nothing changed. The old goblin's expression stayed exactly where it was, and the quill scratched steadily, and the clerks waited. Then Ragnar's eyes moved, just a small movement, just a shift downward to track the growing text on the parchment, and something happened to his face that Harry couldn't entirely name. It wasn't shock. Goblins who'd lived as long as Ragnar probably weren't shocked by much. It was more like the expression of a man who has suspected something for a very long time and is watching it be confirmed, and is angrier than he expected to be. The quill was still writing. Fleur Delacour, behind her mother, had stopped performing boredom. She was leaning fractionally forward, watching the parchment. Apollon's hands had unfolded. One of them lay flat on the table now, fingers spread. The quill kept writing. Griphook made a small sound, not a word, just a sound, the kind that escapes before you can stop it. Sharpthorn's quill was stationary above his ledger, forgotten. Still the genealogical quill wrote. Harry counted seconds without meaning to. 20. 30. 45. The room had gone very quiet in a specific way, the way rooms go quiet when everyone in them is holding something in. At nearly 2 minutes, the quill stopped. Ragnar reached across the table and lifted the parchment. He read it in silence. Then he set it down, looked at Harry across the width of the basin, and said, with a very particular quality of stillness, "How much do you know about your family?" "Almost nothing," Harry said. "My aunt says my parents were unemployed and drunk and died in a car crash." Apollon Delacour made a French sound that was equal parts contempt and sorrow. "Your parents," Ragnar said, "were James Charles Potter, Lord of 4 houses, Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, and Ignotus, and Lily Rose Potter née Evans, who held secondary claimancy on 2 additional lines through her maternal grandmother's unregistered magical heritage." He set one long finger on the parchment. "You are, by blood right, their sole heir. This is expected. It is what would appear for any child of their line." He paused. "What is not expected, what is not, in 300 years of treaty examination, anything I have seen before, is what appears below your hereditary claims." Harry waited. "Below your own blood's declaration," Ragnar said, and his voice had the quality of a verdict, "are 26 additional lordship sigils. Active claims. Houses with living seals and binding rings that should rest with their rightful heir, which is to say, with you, but which are instead currently held in proxy by a third party." He turned the parchment around so Harry could see it, though the writing was in gobbledygook and old magical Latin and Harry could read none of it. 26, Master Potter. Each one held under what appears to be a long-term blood proxy seal. Each one siphoning voting power, political authority, and the ancestral magic of those lines away from your blood right and into someone else's hands. Who? Harry said. Because really, when you stripped it down, that was the only question. Ragnar reached into the folds of his robes and produced a single calling card. He held it for a moment before setting it face up on the table between them. Harry looked at it. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He'd heard the name. Everyone had heard the name, even Dudley's lot at school, where anything magical was treated as a punchline, had heard of Dumbledore. The greatest wizard alive. The defeater of Grindelwald. Headmaster of Hogwarts. Wizarding Britain's most beloved figure. Harry looked at the card for a long time. "Tell me everything," he said. What followed was 2 hours of the most densely packed information Harry had ever tried to absorb. Sharpthorn produced ledgers. Griphook unrolled charts. Apollon Delacour added treaty law in sharp, precise paragraphs, and every so often Ragnar would hold up one finger and everything would stop while he said something with the careful weight of a man who has chosen each syllable. Harry asked questions when he needed to and didn't when he didn't, and tried to build a structure in his head out of what he was learning. The blood proxy seal, as Sharpthorn explained, was an ancient piece of legislation, barely remembered now, mostly used in the last century, that allowed a trusted guardian or regent to hold the voting authority of a minor's inherited titles during their minority, usually until their 11th birthday, when they entered formal magical education and could claim their rings. In wartime, or in the event of a child's extreme youth, or in circumstances of genuine danger to the heir, the arrangement was considered legitimate. The blood proxy seal Dumbledore held on Harry's lordship titles was neither temporary nor limited. It covered not just Harry's own 4 natural titles, Potter, Peverell, Gryffindor, Ignotus, but an additional 22 houses, acquired by Dumbledore under various legal pretexts going back 30 years. Houses that had lost their primary heirs, or whose heirs had been orphaned or imprisoned or declared incompetent. Houses whose last representatives had died under circumstances that, when listed out by Griphook in his flat, ledger clerk voice, began to form a pattern that made the back of Harry's neck go cold. Fleur, at some point, had stopped sitting behind her mother and moved to the chair beside Harry. He hadn't noticed when she'd done it, only that at one point he looked sideways and she was there, reading over his shoulder at the parchment Sharpthorn had slid across. She was taller than him, which was easy given how short he was, and smelled faintly of something that wasn't quite flowers and wasn't quite fire, and she pointed at line 17 without asking permission and said, in an accent like her mother's but slightly less polished, "This one. This is the Pruitt line. The brothers who died in the war, they had no children. Gideon and Fabian Pruitt, killed 1981, Griphook confirmed. The Pruitt lordship should have reverted to the nearest blood relative, one Ginevra Weasley, via her mother. Instead, within 6 weeks of both brothers' deaths, a blood proxy document was filed by Dumbledore citing wartime emergency provision. Miss Weasley is not aware she holds a lordship claim. Her family is not aware. The Pruitt seat in the Wisengamot has been voting under Dumbledore's proxy for 14 years. Fleur sat back. Her expression was the kind that came after you'd decided something. 14 years, Harry said. Not a question. Some of the proxies go back further, Ragnar said. The Bones proxy was filed in 1973. The McKinnon proxy in 1978. The Longbottom, Harry said. There are Longbottoms. I've heard that name. They're not, Frank and Alice Longbottom are alive, Ragnar said, with the precision of a man delivering something heavy, but have been incapacitated by dark magic since 1981. Their son, Neville, is the heir, being raised by his grandmother. The Longbottom lordship should rest in trust for Neville under Augusta Longbottom's regency. Instead, he gestured to the parchment, and Harry didn't need him to finish. He filed a proxy on a child whose parents were tortured into insanity, Harry said. Within 3 months of the event. The room was quiet for a moment. Harry looked down at Dumbledore's card, still lying on the table between them. He thought about the Dursleys' house and the cupboard under the stairs where he'd slept until he was 7 and figured out how to pick the latch. He thought about the word guardian and what it meant when separated from the word protection. He thought about 26 houses, 26 sets of votes, 26 wells of ancestral magic all flowing through one man's hands while everyone looked at that man and saw a hero. Can it be undone? Harry asked. The proxies? Ragnarok looked at him with those old gold eyes. With sufficient legal action, treaty authority, and documented evidence, yes. Not quickly. Not easily. And not without a fight, because the man holding those proxies is not powerless, and he will not surrender 26 Wisengamot seats without a significant response. A pause. It will take time. It will take allies. It will take the willingness to begin a war with someone that most of magical Britain considers untouchable. The old goblin leaned forward slightly. So let me ask you, Master Potter, and I ask because you are 9 years old and because I am honor-bound to give you the choice rather than make it for you, do you want to pursue this? Harry looked at the card one more time. He picked it up and handed it back to Ragnarok. Where do we start, he said. Apollon Delacour called a recess at noon and produced, from somewhere Harry didn't see, a hamper of food that was significantly better than anything that appeared at number 4. She set it on a side table without ceremony and said, in her precise French-accented English, "Eat. Your blood sugar is affecting your thinking," which Harry found unexpectedly funny and laughed at before he could stop himself. Fleur had retreated to stand by the tapestries, examining the crests. Harry took a sandwich he couldn't identify the filling of, whatever it was, it tasted like something a person who actually cooked for you would make, and went to stand near her, because she'd been useful in the meeting and he wanted to understand what the Veela interest in this actually was. The Pruitt line, he said. Is that why you spotted it? Does your council have a connection to the Pruitt family? She turned from the tapestry. Up close she was even more distractingly whatever she was, but Harry had grown up with Dudley's friends trying to intimidate him through physical presence and had developed a useful ability to look past surface effect to what was actually happening underneath. Underneath Fleur Delacour's considerable presence was someone very intelligent who was deciding how much to tell him. The Veela Council has a treaty with the Pruitts going back 4 generations, she said. A mutual defense covenant. When the Pruitt Lordship went dark on our political registers, when we could no longer verify who held it, it concerned the council. It was one of the reasons this examination was requested ahead of the usual schedule. You had a reason to suspect something was wrong before today, Harry said. We had a reason to believe something was possible, she said, which was carefully not the same thing. We did not know what we would find. She looked at him with that grey shifting to silver gaze. We did not expect to find you. What did you expect? A complicated inheritance. Perhaps 1 or 2 irregularities. Standard wizarding carelessness about bloodline documentation. A pause. Not 26 active thefts. Not a 9-year-old child who has been living under what amounts to a deliberately engineered poverty of identity while someone else used his name to vote in the Wisengamot. She said this with a flat, factual anger that Harry appreciated more than sympathy would have been. I didn't know I had a name to vote with, Harry said. No, Fleur said. That was rather the point, wasn't it? They stood together for a moment looking at the tapestries. Harry ate his sandwich. What does the Veela Council want out of this? He asked. Not rudely, he was genuinely curious about how this worked, how these arrangements functioned, who owed what to whom. Fleur seemed to appreciate the directness. The Pruitt covenant restored. The Wisengamot freed of 26 fraudulent proxy votes. And, she added, with something that wasn't quite a smile but occupied the same space, the demonstration that even Albus Dumbledore is not above treaty law. Which would be useful to establish. For future purposes. Your council has had trouble with him before. Our council has been ignored by him before, which in our experience is the beginning of trouble. She turned back to the tapestries. He has twice blocked Veela diplomatic access to Wizarding Britain's domestic courts. He uses his position as Supreme Mugwump to filter what the ICW hears and doesn't hear. He is, she chose the word with some care, architecturally inconvenient. Harry filed that away. How long will your delegation be in Britain? For as long as this takes. She glanced at him sideways. My mother does not start things she doesn't finish. Neither do I, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment, a real look, the kind that's evaluating rather than performing, and then she nodded once, like something had been confirmed. Ragnarok, after the recess, spread 3 things across the table. The first was a document in old gobbledygook that Harry couldn't read but was told was the official Gringotts blood examination report, signed and sealed and therefore legally inviolable under Concordat terms. The second was a map of the Wisengamot chamber with 26 seats marked in red. The third was a list. The list had 26 names. Harry read them all. He didn't recognize most: Bones, Pruitt, Longbottom, Abbott, Selwyn, Knott, Folly, Macmillan, Rowell, Dagworth Granger, and more, family names that meant nothing to a boy raised in a house where magic was a dirty word. But he read each one carefully and let them settle. These families, he said. The living ones. The children like Neville Longbottom. Do any of them know? None of them, Ragnarok said. They should. Harry looked at the map. 26 red seats. If it's their lordships, they should know. In time, Apollon said carefully. The process must be, in time, yes, Harry said, but not in so much time that they keep not knowing while he keeps voting. He looked at Ragnarok. What's the fastest legal action we can take right now, today, before he finds out this examination happened? Ragnarok looked at him with an expression Harry couldn't quite read, and then said, to the room in general rather than to anyone specifically, I said the boy was not afraid. You did, Apollon agreed. What's the fastest action? Harry pressed. 2 things. Ragnarok held up one finger. First, the examination report is filed with the Concordat archive tonight. Under treaty law, it cannot be altered, suppressed, or challenged by any wizarding domestic authority. Dumbledore cannot make it disappear. Second, a second finger, we file an immediate heir recognition notice with the Wisengamot clerk's office. This doesn't restore the proxies yet, but it establishes on the formal record that you exist, that you are aware of your claims, and that any votes cast under your proxied lordships from this date forward are cast under legal challenge. And that wakes him up, Harry said. He'll know. He'll know. Good. Harry said it with a calm that was genuine, not performed, and Ragnarok looked at him again with that expression that had lived somewhere between assessment and something older. You are not frightened of what he might do, Ragnarok said. It wasn't entirely a question. I'm 9 years old and I live in a cupboard, Harry said, simply. He's already done his worst. He just didn't bother to tell me he was doing it. The room was quiet again. Apollon Delacour looked at her daughter. Fleur was looking at Harry. Ragnarok was looking at Harry. Even the clerks had stopped writing. Harry looked back at Ragnarok and waited. There is one more thing, Ragnarok said, and his voice had shifted into something lower and more deliberate. Gringotts has a vested interest in this matter. The Goblin Nation does not forgive fraud committed on accounts held under our jurisdiction. 26 lordship proxies, each backed by ancestral vaults, vaults which have been generating interest, receiving deposits, accumulating assets for the duration of these fraudulent arrangements, represent a significant breach of the banking accords of 1742. He folded his hands on the table. We are not merely advisors in this matter, Master Potter. We are claimants. When you pursue Dumbledore's legal accountability, you do not do so alone. The Goblin Nation stands as co-plaintiff. Harry looked at Ragnarok for a long moment. And the Veela Council, Apollon said quietly, stands as witness and treaty guarantor. So he's not just fighting a 9-year-old, Harry said. No. Ragnarok's gold eyes hadn't moved. He is fighting the 3 oldest forms of law in magical Europe. He simply doesn't know it yet. Harry thought of 26 names on a list. He thought of Neville Longbottom, whoever he was, growing up not knowing he was a lord, same as Harry hadn't. He thought of the proxy votes cast for years under his name, his father's name, his grandfather's name, shaping a world Harry hadn't even been allowed to enter yet. "One more question," he said. "Ask," Ragnarok said. "My godfather." "I have one, I know that much. I found a letter my mum wrote when I was going through some things." Sirius Black. He kept his voice even. "He's in Azkaban." "But the Gringotts records, your records, not the ministry's, do they show what he was convicted of?" Something shifted in Ragnarok's expression. He looked at Sharpthorn, who was already moving to a different ledger, running one narrow finger down a column. "Sirius Orion Black," Sharpthorn said. "Sentenced to Azkaban without trial, 1981. Charge on ministry record, murder of 12 Muggles and 1 Peter Pettigrew, suspected Death Eater activities. Bank record." He paused, and there was a significance in the pause, no trial transcript. No formal sentencing document. No judicial record of any kind. "No trial," Harry said. "None," Sharpthorn confirmed. Harry breathed in slowly. He looked at the list of 26 names and then back at Ragnarok. "Can Goblin law jurisdiction reach Azkaban?" he asked. Ragnarok's expression, this time, was something Harry was almost certain was satisfaction. "Master Potter," the Goblin King said, "Goblin law jurisdiction reaches everywhere human law has failed." They kept him until 3 o'clock. By the end he had a copy of the blood examination report sealed in goblin-warded leather. He had Ragnarok's personal contact, not the standard Gringotts address but a direct channel, a small silver disc that would vibrate once if Ragnarok needed to speak with him and twice if it was urgent. He had Apollon Delacour's formal acknowledgement in writing that the Veela Council recognized him as Lord Apparent of the 26 Houses and would support his claims in any international tribunal. He had a list of tutors Ragnarok was willing to sponsor, specialists in blood law and hereditary magic and wizarding political history, who could begin working with him immediately, before Hogwarts, before the world knew his name. He realized as Miriam Clearwater walked him back up through the green-lit corridor, more in one afternoon than he'd had in 9 years combined. Fleur caught up with him at the side door, just before he went out to the street. She'd clearly moved quickly to get there before him, though she didn't show it. "Potter," she said. He turned. She looked at him with that evaluating look again. "This will not be simple," she said. "He is loved. He is powerful. People will not want to believe it." "I know," Harry said. "It may take years." "I know that too." A pause. "You are 9 years old," she said, not dismissively but as if she was testing what the words weighed. "So everyone keeps pointing out." He met her gray-silver eyes. "Does it change anything?" Fleur was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression, the weaponized boredom gone, something more real underneath it, something closer to respect finding its shape. "No," she said. "It doesn't." "Then I'll see you again," Harry said. "When whatever comes next, comes." He pushed open the door and walked out into London, into the ordinary afternoon traffic and ordinary noise and a completely ordinary world that had no idea that a 9-year-old with grass-stained knees and a letter in a sealed leather case had just begun the unraveling of everything Albus Dumbledore had spent 30 years building. Miriam Clearwater, who was waiting by the car, looked at his face as he approached and apparently read something in it, because she said nothing on the drive home and held the door open for him in a way that was just slightly more careful than it had been that morning. Harry held the leather case on his lap the whole drive back and looked out the window at the city and the country and the houses rolling past, and somewhere in his chest the compass needle that had moved that morning settled into a direction and held. Number 4 Privet Drive looked the same when they pulled up. Petunia's car in the drive. The garden exactly as he'd left it, half-weeded. The house with its clean white walls and twitching curtains and everything in it that had tried, for 9 years, to make him nothing. Harry got out of the car. He walked up the front path. He didn't look back. He had work to do. Chapter 2, The Boy Who Owned Everything. 3 months later, the silver disc vibrated twice. Harry was in the middle of a session with Aldrich Pemberton, the blood law specialist Ragnarok had sent, a thin and intensely focused wizard in his 60s who communicated primarily in precise statements and had the unsettling habit of being right about everything. They were working through the legal framework of hereditary proxy dissolution at the kitchen table of number 4. Petunia had tried, once, to refuse Pemberton entry, and Pemberton had produced a document bearing the Gringotts seal and the Concordat crest and said, simply, "I will be here every Tuesday and Thursday regardless," and that had been that. The disc hummed against Harry's wrist where he'd taken to keeping it on a cord. He felt the double pulse and looked at it, then at Pemberton. "Urgent," Harry said. Pemberton closed his book without being asked. "Then go." Harry went to the hallway, away from the kitchen where he could hear Vernon aggressively watching television, and pressed his thumb to the center of the disc the way Ragnarok had shown him. Ragnarok's voice came through it like sound through deep water, not distorted, just heavy with its own gravity. "Master Potter. There have been developments. Can you travel tomorrow morning?" "Yes," Harry said. "There is a second matter we need to discuss. It concerns your godfather." A pause. "It concerns a petition we filed 3 weeks ago through Goblin jurisdictional law, citing illegal imprisonment without trial. The ministry has responded." Harry's hand tightened on the disc. "What did they say?" "What they said," Ragnarok replied, "is less interesting than what they did. Cornelius Fudge personally contacted my office this morning. He was," the briefest pause, "emotional." "Fudge runs the ministry," Harry said, not a question, just placing it. "Fudge runs the ministry the way a man holds an umbrella in a gale," Ragnarok said, which was the driest thing Harry had ever heard from him. "Be here at 9. He was there at 8:45. Ragnarok was already in the circular room, standing rather than sitting, which Harry had learned meant something was actively moving and hadn't settled yet. Apollon Delacour was there too, at the table, a cup of something steaming near her right hand and 3 documents spread before her. She nodded when Harry entered with the exact quality of nod that acknowledged him as a party rather than a guest. Fleur was not there this time. Harry noticed the absence and filed it without particular feeling. "Sit," Ragnarok said. "The ministry's response to our habeas petition on Black was delivered at 7 this morning. Fudge's office claims the petition is invalid on grounds that Azkaban falls under domestic magical jurisdiction and Goblin law has no reach there." "Which is incorrect," Harry said. He'd been doing his reading. "Spectacularly incorrect." Ragnarok moved to his chair but didn't sit in it, he stood behind it, hands on the back, which Harry had also learned meant he was in motion towards something and thinking faster than he was speaking. The Azkaban facility was constructed on land leased from the Goblin Nation in 1718, under the Islet Accord. The lease was renewed in 1818, and again in 1918. It is due for renewal in 2018, which Fudge has apparently not checked, because if he had he would know that the ministry has been in breach of the Islet Accord's prisoner rights clause since 1970. "Since before Sirius was even born," Apollon said quietly, turning one of the documents to face Harry. Harry looked at it. "What's the prisoner rights clause?" "Article 9, Ragnarok said. No person imprisoned on land held under Goblin lease may be detained without formal trial documentation filed with the Gringotts Legal Archive within 6 months of imprisonment. If no documentation is filed, the imprisonment is void under the terms of the lease, and the prisoner must be released." He let a beat pass. "Sirius Black has been imprisoned for 11 years. No trial documentation was ever filed." The room felt very still. "He should have been released in 1982, Harry said. "He should never have been imprisoned at all under our jurisdiction," Ragnarok said, "because there was no trial. But even accepting the ministry's premise, yes, by 1982, the Islet Accord required his release." The old goblin's voice was flat and cold in a way that communicated fury more effectively than volume would have. "Fudge's refusal of our petition is therefore not only legally incorrect, it is a second breach of the Accord, obstruction of a remedy already owed." Harry looked at Apollon. What does the Veela Council's position give us? The Veela Council, Apollon said, is a signatory to the Accord. Our recognition of your petition as treaty legitimate gives it standing in international magical law that the Ministry cannot simply bat aside. She tapped one document. We filed our recognition this morning, before you arrived. So Fudge can say no, Harry said slowly, but he can't say no and have it stick. Not without international consequences he cannot afford, Apollon agreed. The question is whether he understands that yet. He doesn't, Ragnarok said. He thinks this is a small legal annoyance from the Goblin Nation that he can outlast with bureaucratic delay. He has not yet grasped the full scope of what the blood examination found. A pause, and Harry recognized this pause. It was the kind that preceded something Ragnarok had decided and was delivering with care. Which is why I have not told him. Harry looked at him. I have kept the full content of the blood examination report confined to the Concordat archive and to those present in this room, Ragnarok said. Fudge knows we conducted the examination. He does not know what it found. He thinks the Black Petition is a separate matter arising from routine treaty procedure. The old goblin's golden eyes were steady on Harry's face. I wanted to ask you whether you wish to keep it that way for now, or whether you wanted to use the examination results as immediate leverage. Harry thought about it. Pemberton had been drilling him on exactly this kind of strategic sequencing for 3 months, which weapons to show, which to hold, when revealing knowledge was more powerful than deploying it. He'd been a better-than-expected student, Pemberton said, with the careful phrasing of a man who meant exceptional and was professionally reluctant to say so. Keep it separate, Harry said. If we connect everything now, Dumbledore knows we know, and he's had 30 years to build defenses. We get Sirius out first. Then we build the Lordship case in parallel. The day we go public with the examination report, we want Sirius already free and publicly exonerated, because then Dumbledore can't use him as leverage against us. Apollon Delacour was looking at him with an expression her face didn't usually organize into. After a moment she picked up her cup and said, over the rim of it, to Ragnarok, 9 years old. Nearly 10, Harry corrected. Nearly 10, she repeated, with something in her voice that sounded like it might have been fond if it had been given another few seconds to develop. The black extraction, Ragnarok said, and now he did sit, pulling his chair forward with the focused energy of a man shifting into execution, will require 3 things. First, a formal Islet Accord breach notice filed with the International Magical Registry. I am drafting it today. Second, a mediating presence at the physical transfer, because the Dementors are ministry employed but they work on land under our jurisdiction and we have the right to supervise. Third, he paused, a healer. Black has been in Azkaban for 11 years under Dementor guard. He will not come out healthy. I know, Harry said. He'd thought about this part. He'd thought about it quite a lot, actually, at night when the house was quiet and the weeds were done and there was nothing to do but lie on the camp bed. They'd moved him out of the cupboard when Pemberton started coming, because Petunia had apparently drawn a line at a professional witness to that particular arrangement, and think about what Sirius Black would look like, after 11 years. There is one more thing, Ragnarok said, and something in his tone made Harry focus sharper. When Black is released, when he is out, recovering, clear-headed enough to understand his situation, he will need to be told everything. About the examination. About the 26 houses. About Dumbledore. A pause. He was, by all our records, close to James Potter. He was there at the beginning of all of this. His testimony, if he chooses to give it, will be significant. But, Ragnarok looked at him steadily, he may also have his own grief about what was done, and his own views about how to respond. He has been in Azkaban for 11 years. He may not be, he chose the word, patient. I know, Harry said again. He's family. We figure it out together. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. You have never met him. No, Harry agreed. But he's still family. The extraction happened on a Wednesday in February, fast and procedurally brutal in the way that things are when you've given the other party no time to build a response. Ragnarok filed the breach notice on Monday. By Monday evening, the International Magical Registry had confirmed receipt. On Tuesday morning, 3 major European wizarding governments, France and 2 others, Harry later learned the Veela Council had contacts in, filed supporting acknowledgements of the breach. By Tuesday noon, Fudge's office was making frantic attempts to contact Ragnarok, all of which Ragnarok did not take, which Harry found deeply satisfying in a way he recognized wasn't entirely dignified but didn't bother to suppress. On Wednesday at 6 in the morning, a Gringotts legal team accompanied by 2 Veela Council representatives and 1 ministry observer who'd been given so little notice he'd arrived with toast crumbs still on his shirt, traveled by Goblin Ward Portkey to Azkaban Island. Harry wasn't there for the extraction itself. Ragnarok had been firm about that. He was 9, nearly 10, and Azkaban was not a place to bring children regardless of the circumstances. Harry had looked at Ragnarok and calculated whether to push back, and decided that on this specific point Ragnarok was right, and that the ability to recognize when someone was right was at least as useful as the ability to argue when they weren't. So he waited at Gringotts, in a small room off the main corridor with a fire going in Pemberton, who had shown up without being asked and brought books and said nothing but sat there reading in a way that was quietly companionable, which Harry appreciated more than he would have said. The fire turned green at 9:43. A stretcher came through first, carried by 2 goblins and supporting a shape under thick grey blankets that Harry had to look at for a moment before his brain organized it into a human being. The shape was too thin, even under the blankets. The face above them was gaunt in a way that went beyond thin into something structural, cheekbones too prominent, eye sockets too deep, skin with the grey-yellow quality of something that hadn't seen sun in years. But even so, even with all of that, Harry looked at Sirius Black's unconscious face and found his father's face looking back at him, not literally, not in features, but in the angle of the jaw and the shape of the brow, and something indefinable that was purely about the way someone has been loved, is still being loved, across absence and time and the specific cruelty of 11 years in a place designed to destroy everything a person was. He didn't realize he'd stood up until he was standing. Ragnarok came through after the stretcher, and behind him Miriam Clearwater, and behind her someone Harry hadn't seen before, a witch in healer's robes, efficient looking, who was already pulling out a diagnostic wand and moving toward the stretcher before she'd fully cleared the fireplace. Healer Pomfrey's counterpart in the private sector, Ragnarok said, by way of introduction, because he knew Harry wouldn't ask and was telling him anyway. Healer Marceline Voss. She is good. How is he? Harry asked. Ragnarok looked at him with those gold eyes. Alive, he said. Physically intact, which is more than I expected. Mentally, he paused, we will see, when he wakes. The Dementors did not kiss him. He maintained his animagus form for significant portions of his imprisonment, which limited their effect. Ragnarok's tone was matter-of-fact, as though this was just information, but Harry heard in it the acknowledgement that Sirius had found something to hold on to, some piece of himself to protect. Healer Voss looked up from the stretcher. He'll wake in a few hours. He needs food, warmth, nutrition potions, and a structured environment when he comes around. Loud noises, sudden movements, and more than 3 people in a room will be disorienting. She looked at Harry directly. You're the nephew. Godson, Harry said. He'll want to see you first, she said, with the confidence of someone who had seen this particular kind of situation before and knew how it worked. When he wakes, you go in alone, before anyone else. Whatever he says, don't argue, don't correct, just let him talk himself out. When he's tired, then you can tell him things. Harry nodded. I understand. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that said you are an unusually composed child and then went back to her diagnostic work. Pemberton had closed his book. He and Ragnarok looked at each other across the room, and something passed between them that Harry clocked but couldn't translate, some communication between 2 people who'd known each other longer than Harry had been alive. We have time, Pemberton said, to Harry. While we wait. We might as well work. Sirius woke at 1:30. Harry heard it from the outer room, a voice, low and rough and catching on itself, saying a name. James. Then, differently, James. And then a silence that was worse than either version of the name, because it was the silence of someone remembering where they were and then where they weren't, and what that meant. Healer Voss came out, met Harry's eyes, and held the door. The room was small and warm, which Harry suspected was deliberate. Sirius was propped up on the narrow bed, blankets pulled up, his dark hair hanging lank around a face that looked even more precisely ruined awake than it had unconscious. But his eyes, grey, when they found Harry, were sharp. Shattered in ways that would take a long time to show themselves fully, but sharp. He stared at Harry for a long moment. "You look like James," he said. His voice was hoarse from disuse and cracked slightly on the name. "I know," Harry said. "I've been told. Your eyes are lilies." A pause, and something moved through his face too quickly to follow. "I thought you'd be smaller." "I'm small for my age," Harry said. "I'm told that'll change." Something that might become a smile in better circumstances crossed Sirius's face and didn't quite complete itself. James was small at 9. He grew. He looked at Harry for another long moment. "How long have you known about all of this?" 3 months, Harry said. Sirius closed his eyes briefly. "Opened them." "Who told you?" "A blood test," Harry said. "The Goblin-Veela Concordat. It was mandatory, I didn't seek it out. But what it found," he stopped. Remembered Healer Voss. Let him talk himself out first. "What did it find?" Sirius asked, and his voice had a specific quality, not afraid, but braced. "A lot," Harry said. But first, he pulled up the chair beside the bed and sat down, because he was still shorter standing than Sirius was propped up, and he wanted to look at him level. "First, are you all right?" Sirius looked at the question like he wasn't sure where to put it. "No," he said, after a moment. "But I'm going to be." He said it like a decision rather than a hope, and Harry recognized that quality and felt something in his chest ease a fraction. "Good," Harry said. "Because there's a lot you need to know, and I need you functional to hear it." Sirius stared at him. "You're 9 years old," he said. "Nearly 10. And I know, everyone says that. It doesn't change the situation." A real sound, this time, rough and abbreviated but genuine, something that was the starting material for a laugh. "James would have loved you," Sirius said. He said it quietly, like something he was placing down rather than giving away. Harry let that land where it needed to land and didn't try to respond to it directly. "I know about Peter," he said instead. "I know what actually happened. Ragnarok's people found the discrepancies, no trial, no documentation." He paused. "I know it wasn't you." Sirius went very still. "I know who you are," Harry said. "And I know what was done to you, and I know that neither of those things should have happened." He looked at Sirius steadily. "And I'm going to fix it. Both of it." Sirius looked at him for a long time. The gray eyes were doing something complex that Harry didn't have the full vocabulary for yet, grief and anger and something fragile and something that was maybe the first real thing to happen to him in 11 years that was good. "Tell me," Sirius said. "Tell me everything." So Harry did. He talked for over an hour. He laid it out the way Pemberton had taught him to, chronologically, evidentially, without unnecessary editorializing, letting the facts carry the weight. He told Sirius about the blood examination and the 26 names. He told him about the proxy seals, about the Wisengamot votes, about the pattern of houses that had lost heirs in circumstances that accumulated into something that wasn't coincidence. He told him about Ragnarok's involvement, and the Veela Council, and Apollon Delacour's formal recognition. He told him about Dumbledore. Sirius listened. He was still throughout, unnaturally still, the stillness of someone who has spent 11 years learning not to move because movement attracted attention in places where attention was dangerous. But his eyes tracked every word, and when Harry finished he sat for a moment with that complex thing happening in his expression. "He filed a proxy on the Potter Lordship," Sirius said. "Not a question. Working it through. James's title. He filed it within, how long after the murders?" 6 weeks, Harry said. Sirius looked at the far wall. His jaw worked once. "He came to me," he said, slowly, like he was excavating something. Before everything went wrong, that last month. He came to me and told me your parents needed to change their secret keeper. That I was too obvious a choice. That Peter was safer." He paused. "I thought it was strategy. I thought he was being tactically smart." Harry said nothing. "Let it sit." "He needed me out of the way," Sirius said. "If I was the secret keeper, I'd have known Peter had betrayed them, and I wouldn't have gone tearing off after him alone like an idiot. I'd have come back. I'd have been with you. I'd have." He stopped. "He needed you in Azkaban," Harry said. "Not dead, just removed. If you were dead there'd be an investigation into why. But an obvious suspect, no trial needed, everyone assuming guilt, and the blacks were never popular. Everyone wanted to believe I'd gone dark." Sirius's voice was flat and terrible and perfectly controlled. James would have trusted Dumbledore's judgment. So would Lily. They did trust it. That's how he convinced them to change the keeper. "I'm sorry," Harry said. Sirius looked at him sharply, like the apology was the last thing he'd expected. "For what? You were 1 year old." "Still," Harry said. Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Then, how long before this goes public?" "We're not ready yet. Pemberton thinks 6 months, minimum, before the legal case is airtight enough that Dumbledore can't use procedural challenges to bury it. And I want to claim the Lordship rings first, the ones I can claim now, without full tribunal approval, just by heritage right, because once I'm formally in the Wizengamot record as an active lord rather than a minor heir, the proxy challenge becomes significantly harder to dismiss." Sirius stared at him. "You sound 40 years old." "I've had good teachers," Harry said. "Ragnarok, and Pemberton, the blood law specialist. He paused, then said honestly, "They care about this differently than I do. But they care. And that matters." "I want to meet Ragnarok," Sirius said. "He wants to meet you too." Harry allowed himself a small smile. "He said you're a person of legally significant interest." "High praise from a goblin," Sirius said, drily, and this time the sound he made was more fully a laugh, ruined and rusty and real. 3 days later, Sirius was well enough to sit in the circular room. He'd eaten, aggressively, with the focused intensity of someone making up for 11 years of deficit, and Healer Voss had cleared him for minimal activity and looked at him in a way that communicated she would be watching. He was still too thin, still grey at the edges, but he sat upright in his chair with a recovered dignity that Harry suspected had always been there, simply buried. Ragnarok looked at Sirius Black for a long moment when he entered, and Sirius looked back, and some kind of evaluation happened between them that was wordless and complete. "You were James Potter's closest friend," Ragnarok said. "I was," Sirius said. "You understand what we are doing here?" Harry explained it. Sirius's voice was steady. "I want to help. Whatever that means legally, whatever I can contribute, testimony, whatever the Potters kept in their vaults that I know about, anything. I want to help." "Your testimony will be significant," Ragnarok said. "Particularly your account of Dumbledore's recommendation to change the secret keeper. Do you remember it in sufficient detail to swear before a Wizengamot truth panel?" "I remember every conversation I had in the month before November 1st, 1981, Sirius said quietly. "I have had 11 years with nothing but time to go over them." Ragnarok nodded once, the kind of nod that means good and I'm sorry simultaneously. There is another matter, Apollon Delacour said. She'd arrived that morning from Paris, a day earlier than expected. She was looking at Sirius with a professional assessment that softened slightly around the edges. You are Harry's godfather and magical guardian. Currently, Harry resides with his maternal aunt under what appears to be an informal arrangement. We should discuss the formal guardianship transfer. The Dursleys have no legal claim on him, Sirius said immediately, and the speed of it revealed how much he'd been thinking about it. James named me his guardian in the Potter will. Lily named me in hers. Whatever Dumbledore arranged, informally placing him with the Dursleys, was not legal under either Wizarding or Goblin family law, Ragnarok confirmed. There was no formal guardianship petition, no court order, nothing. Dumbledore used his influence to physically deliver Harry to Privet Drive and apparently trusted that no one would question it. He paused. And no one did. He wanted me contained, Harry said, not bitterly, just factually. Far from the wizarding world, with people who'd make sure I didn't learn anything about who I was. He looked at Sirius. Living with muggles who hated magic was probably the plan. Keep me small and ignorant and grateful when Hogwarts came along. Sirius looked at him. Were the Dursleys, they weren't physically, Harry paused. It was a cupboard, he said, simply. For the first 7 years. Sirius's face did something that was very quiet and very controlled and very angry. After that, a small bedroom, Harry said. And enough food, and that's about as far as the hospitality went. He looked at Sirius directly. It's done. I don't need you to be angry about it on my behalf. What I need is for us to work the problem forward. Sirius looked at him for a long moment, and Harry could see him filing it away, putting it in a box to be dealt with separately, the same way Harry had dealt with it, not because it didn't matter but because it couldn't be the center of everything right now. Formal guardianship transfer, Sirius said to Ragnarok. What do we need? A residence that is not the property of a currently incarcerated or disgraced person, Ragnarok said, and there was something almost gentle in the way he said it. Which is to say, do you have access to any black property that is not Azkaban adjacent in legal standing? 12 Grimmauld Place is the Black family home, Sirius said. It's mine by inheritance. Walburga died in 85, I know that because the reading of the will was one of 3 pieces of outside information I received in 11 years. It'll be in a state, and it'll need cleaning, and I'd rather spend time in a dragon's mouth, but it's mine and it's warded beyond anything Dumbledore can get through without our invitation. Then that is where we go next, Ragnarok said. The Lordship rings came on a Thursday, which Pemberton said was traditional without explaining why, and Harry decided not to ask. They were in a deep vault, deeper than Harry had thought the bank went, which was saying something given the cart ride had gone down for what felt like several minutes in a way that made his ears pop. The vault wasn't temperature controlled or dramatically lit. It was just stone and torchlight and a series of display stands around the walls, each bearing a ring. Harry walked the perimeter slowly. Potter, gold band, deep red stone with a lion in it that moved. He'd been told what to expect but his hand still went still for a moment when he picked it up, because it warmed against his palm in a specific way, the way something does when it recognizes you. He slid it onto the index finger of his right hand and it resized itself. Peveril, very old, silver dark metal that didn't look like any alloy Harry could identify, a triangular device on the face with a line through it. When he put it on it felt heavy in a way that wasn't physical. Gryffindor, Harry looked at this one for a long moment. Gryffindor. Like the schoolhouse. He thought about the portraits he'd seen in books and the name that every child apparently knew and the fact that somewhere in his bloodline, impossibly, he was connected to this. He put it on his right middle finger and it settled with a kind of finality that was different from the others. Ignotus, smaller, the most unassuming of the 4, a pale stone, no moving parts, just a quiet deep magic that sat on his skin like a hand resting, not pressing. 4 rings. His. Always his, taken without his knowledge, and now returned. He stood in the vault with 4 rings on his right hand and felt the accumulated magic of them the way you feel sunlight after a long winter, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just present and warm and real. Ragnar stood behind him and said nothing. Harry turned. "The other 22, he said. "The ones we can't claim yet until the tribunal, they will come," Ragnar said. "They'll come," Harry agreed. "Not a question. A commitment." He looked at his hand. 4 rings. 4 lordships. 4 voices in the Wizengamot that were his, that voted with his will, that Dumbledore could no longer use. It was, he thought, a beginning. That evening, back at Grimmauld Place, which had taken a day of ferocious cleaning charms and one very determined goblin cleaning team before it was habitable, and still smelled of old magic and older decisions and the particular mustiness of a house that has been empty for years, Harry sat across from Sirius at a kitchen table that was clean for the first time in decades and ate something Sirius had made from ingredients Miriam Clearwater had brought. Sirius wasn't a bad cook, it turned out. This surprised Harry, who didn't know why it surprised him. Sirius explained, without being asked, that when you'd grown up in a household where the elf did everything you learned to cook out of spite, which Harry found entirely logical. 4 rings, Sirius said, looking at Harry's hand. 4. James had 4. A pause. He wore them to the Wizengamot when he turned 17. He came home and Euphemia, not mine, Euphemia made a fuss and James pretended to be irritated. Sirius smiled at the memory, and it was a real smile this time, worn and uneven and genuine. He was dead chuffed really. What was he like? Harry asked. In the Wizengamot. Terrifying, Sirius said, which was not the word Harry had expected. He was one of those people who looked like he was being easygoing right up until he wasn't, and when he wasn't, when something actually mattered to him, he just hit differently. He looked at Harry's hand again. Like you, I think. You don't know me yet, Harry said. I know your eyes, Sirius said. And I've watched you run a meeting with a Goblin King, a Veela diplomat, and a blood law specialist without blinking. He shook his head slowly. I know enough. Harry looked at his 4 rings and thought about the 22 he didn't have yet, and the list with 26 names, and Dumbledore's calling card still sitting in the Concordat archive with everything else. 6 months, he said. Pemberton says 6 months until the legal case is tight. I know. Sirius refilled Harry's glass of water. I've been thinking. Peter, he faked his death. He's alive somewhere. If we can find him, Ragnar's people are looking, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. You're already on it. He's evidence, Harry said. The best kind. Living evidence that changes the entire narrative of 1981. He met Sirius's eyes. Don't go after him yourself. Harry, I know what you want to do, Harry said, quietly but without backing down. I understand it. But if you find him and he disappears or gets hurt, it looks like the convicted murderer silencing a witness. We need Peter alive and testifying. A pause. Can you do that? Can you wait? Sirius looked at him for a very long time. You are, he said, either the most disciplined 9-year-old in recorded history or you have somehow already made a deal with a time-turner. Nearly 10, Harry said. Nearly 10, Sirius conceded. He was quiet for a moment. Yes. I can wait. I'll try. Good. Harry picked up his fork. Try hard. Sirius laughed, a real one this time, surprised out of him, and it echoed in the large cleaned kitchen of the ancient house and sounded, Harry thought, like something waking up. The first letter from Dumbledore arrived 6 days after the air recognition notice landed at the Wizengamot clerk's office. It was addressed to Harry, in distinctive purple ink, and it arrived at Grimmauld Place through Sirius's wards, which it should not have been able to do. That alone told Harry several things about what Dumbledore knew and how he'd known it. Harry read it at the kitchen table with Sirius standing behind his shoulder. The letter was warm. It was kind. It expressed Dumbledore's delight at learning that Harry had begun engaging with his magical heritage and his earnest hope that they might meet and discuss any questions Harry had about his remarkable family. It mentioned, in a tone of affectionate bemusement, that there seemed to be some confusion at the Wizengamot clerk's office about proxy documentation easily sorted out. It invited Harry to tea. It was the most carefully constructed piece of writing Harry had read, and it was constructed to do exactly one thing: establish that Dumbledore knew Harry had moved, knew about the notice, and was entirely unconcerned. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it, set it aside, and said, "He doesn't know about the blood examination." "You sure?" Sirius asked. "If he knew about the examination he wouldn't be offering tea." Harry looked at the letter. "He'd be offering something bigger. Something impressive. He'd be establishing his good intentions with real weight behind them. This," he gestured at the letter, "this is him playing it small because he thinks it's still small." Sirius considered this. "You're not going to reply?" "Not yet." Harry looked at his 4 rings. "When I reply, it'll be from the Wizengamot floor." He got up from the table and went to find Pemberton, because there was work to do and the 6 months were already running. Chapter 3, Dumbledore's Architecture. The map arrived on a Monday. Sharpthorn delivered it personally, which was unusual enough that Harry put down the legal text he'd been annotating and gave the clerk his full attention. It was a large sheet of parchment, rolled tight and sealed with 3 different wax impressions, and when Sharpthorn unrolled it across the circular room's table the scope of it took a moment to absorb. Every lordship Dumbledore controlled was represented as a node. Every node was connected by lines, thin red threads drawn in goblin cartography ink that shifted slightly when you looked at it, live data updating in real time, to other nodes, other institutions, other offices. The Wizengamot chamber sat in the center like a heart, with arteries running out to the ICW, to the Hogwarts Board of Governors, to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, to 17 different committees and subcommittees whose names Harry didn't know yet but was learning. 26 proxy seats. Each one a vote. Each vote a lever. Each lever connected to something that moved something else. It wasn't a conspiracy, Harry thought, studying it. It was an architecture. A structure built with patience and precision over 30 years, each piece fitting the next, load-bearing, interdependent, elegant in the way that things are elegant when someone very intelligent has had enough time and enough conviction to make them so. "He built this," Harry said. "Largely before your parents were killed," Pemberton said, from his chair against the wall. He'd been looking at the map since it went up, with the expression he wore when he was recalibrating. "The first proxy, the Bones acquisition, predates Voldemort's rise significantly. 1973, the McKinnon acquisition 1978. What the war years gave him was justification. Emergency provision, wartime necessity, the rhetoric of sacrifice for the greater good." He paused. He didn't build this to defeat Voldemort. He built this before Voldemort was relevant, and used Voldemort's existence to consolidate what he'd already taken. The room was quiet. Sirius was leaning against the wall opposite, arms crossed, looking at the map with an expression that had been getting increasingly controlled since he'd first seen it, which was its own kind of warning sign. "The McKinnon line," he said, without moving. "Marlene McKinnon. She was in the Order. She and her whole family were killed by Death Eaters in 81. He looked at Pemberton. "And Dumbledore filed a proxy on the McKinnon lordship within 4 months of her death," Pemberton said. Sirius nodded once, slowly, in the way that meant he was putting something very large and very heavy somewhere manageable so he could keep functioning. Harry looked back at the map. "Let's talk about what each seat was used for," he said. "Not abstractly, specifically. What votes did those 26 proxies cast, and what did those votes change?" Sharpthorn produced a second document. Ragnarok, who had been standing at the head of the table in his characteristic thinking stand, moved to sit, and Harry recognized this as the shift from analysis to testimony. "I'll summarize the significant ones," Ragnarok said. In 1979, a motion before the Wiesengemot to restrict Auror powers under wartime provision, a motion that would have allowed the ministry to hold suspects without charge, passed by a margin of 4 votes. Dumbledore's proxies provided 6 of the votes in favor. He set one finger on the parchment. The motion was opposed by James and Lily Potter and their allies. It passed anyway. They were fighting him even then, Sirius said, quietly. Your father, Ragnar said to Harry, was a more significant political figure than his age suggested. He inherited his lordships at 17 and used them aggressively. He voted against Dumbledore's position on 11 separate recorded motions between 1978 and 1981. A pause. He was, we believe, becoming aware that something was wrong with the proxy mathematics. He mentioned it in a letter to Bathilda Bagshot, written in the summer of 1981, which Gringotts holds in archive. Harry looked at Ragnar. He figured it out. He was beginning to. Whether he had enough to act on before the end, Ragnar gestured to the obvious answer to that question. The room absorbed this. What else? Harry said. 1982, motion to transfer jurisdiction over several dark artifact cases from the Auror office to the Unspeakables, passed with proxy support, limiting public oversight of the investigations. 1984. Motion to restrict Azkaban visitation rights, passed with proxy support, effectively making it harder to investigate prisoner conditions. Ragnar's voice stayed flat and even throughout this, which made it worse rather than better. 1986, motion to grant the Hogwarts headmaster expanded authority over the academic curriculum without board approval, passed with proxy support. This one gave Dumbledore formal institutional control of Hogwarts independent of the governors who were supposed to oversee him. He voted himself more power, Harry said. Using your name, Ragnar confirmed. Harry looked at the map. He'd spent 6 months with this material and thought he'd absorbed the shape of it, but seeing it laid out like this, motion by motion, year by year, each one a small redirect that accumulated into something vast, he felt the full weight of it for the first time. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and more useful. When do we go to Dumbledore directly? He asked. Everyone in the room looked at him. We've been working around him for 6 months, Harry said. Building the case, claiming the rings, getting Sirius out. At some point we need to put the evidence in front of him and get his response on record, because whatever he says, whether he defends it or denies it or tries to justify it, becomes part of the case. He looked at Pemberton. A recorded confrontation, done properly, under Goblin legal witness, that's more valuable than a surprise move at the tribunal, right? Pemberton looked thoughtful in a way that Harry had learned meant you're right and I'm annoyed you got there first. A witnessed truth-adjacent interview under the Concordat's formal inquiry provision would be legally significant, yes. It requires his agreement to attend, which he may not give. He'll give it, Harry said. You're confident of that, Sirius said. Not skeptically, he'd stopped being skeptical of Harry's read somewhere around week 3 of their acquaintance. He sent me a tea invitation, Harry said. He wants the meeting. He thinks he can manage me in a room, charm me, explain it away, establish the relationship he wants with me before the tribunal. He doesn't know how much we know. Harry picked up Dumbledore's letter from where it had been sitting in the folder beside the map. I'm going to accept it. But on our terms and in our location. Our location meaning, Apollon Delacour, who had returned from Paris 2 days ago and had been listening from the end of the table with that unreadable professional expression, gestured carefully. Here, Harry said. Gringotts. The circular room, which is Concordat ground. And we invite Nicholas Flamel. The temperature in the room changed. Ragnar looked at Harry with those ancient gold eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then, Flamel has not been involved in British wizarding politics for 40 years. But he has a connection to both nations, Harry said. And to Dumbledore specifically, Dumbledore wrote his alchemical research biography, they've been friends for decades. If Flamel is present and clearly on the side of what we're doing, that sends a message. He paused. It also protects Flamel. If Dumbledore ever decides to tidy up loose ends, having Flamel formally on record as a concordat witness makes him a much more dangerous person to tidy. Another silence. Apollon looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at the map. Pemberton appeared to be doing several calculations simultaneously. Flamel owes the Goblin Nation a debt, Ragnarok said finally. From 1890. He has been retiring that debt in installments for a century. He tilted his head. His next installment is not due for 11 years. We could request early payment. Would he? Harry asked. He might find the opportunity compelling, Ragnarok said, with the particular tone of someone who knows something they're not going to fully explain. Nicholas Flamel has lived long enough to develop opinions about Dumbledore, and those opinions have been, a pause, complex, for some time. Then let's find out, Harry said. Nicholas Flamel arrived on a Friday, which gave Harry 4 days to not think about it and fail. He was not what Harry expected, which Harry had tried to prepare himself for and still didn't quite manage. Flamel was 665 years old and looked roughly 70, sharp-faced, compact, with white hair cropped close and eyes that were the color of deep water and had the quality, in Harry's experience, of eyes that had been looking at things long enough that very little surprised them anymore. He walked into the circular room and looked at the map first. Studied it for a moment with his head slightly tilted. Then he looked at Harry. Ragnarok tells me you are 9, he said. French accent, but almost transparent with age, more the memory of an accent than the thing itself. 10, Harry said. His birthday had come and gone in the way that birthdays at Grimmauld Place went. Sirius had made a cake with architecture that was more ambitious than successful, Miriam Clearwater had sent something from a very good bakery, and Ragnarok had sent a formal letter of acknowledgement that somehow felt warmer than it had any right to. Flamel looked at the map again. I have been watching Albus for 40 years. I have been making excuses for Albus for approximately 35 of those years. He said it without particular emotion, simply stating it. I would like to understand what you have found. Sit down, Harry said. We'll show you everything. Flamel took 3 hours with the documents. He didn't ask many questions, mostly he read, and occasionally he set something down and sat still for a moment in the way of someone integrating new information into a very large existing structure. Once he said, without looking up from a ledger, the Dagworth Granger proxy. This is how he controlled the Heritage Classification Board. I wondered about that. And then he went back to reading. At the end of 3 hours he set down the last document, folded his hands on the table, and looked at Harry. What do you want from me? He asked. Directly, no preamble. Testimony, Harry said. And your presence at the confrontation. And, he paused, any specific knowledge you have about Dumbledore's motivations. The why of it. The why, Flamel repeated. He was quiet for a moment. Do you want the version that makes him sympathetic, or the version that makes him dangerous? Both, Harry said. Because understanding him is how we predict what he does next. Flamel looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, Albus Dumbledore believes, with absolute and total sincerity, that he is the most capable person in magical Europe to determine what is good for the magical world. He does not think of himself as stealing. He thinks of himself as stewarding. He genuinely believes that in his hands, those 26 votes produce better outcomes than they would produce in the hands of their rightful owners. He spread his hands on the table. He has been right about a number of things. Grindelwald. The resistance to Voldemort. Several wars he prevented that most people don't know to thank him for. These successes have made him certain that his judgment is categorically superior and should not be constrained by ordinary process. He's not wrong that he's capable, Sirius said, from his usual position against the wall. His tone was the tone of someone making an extremely difficult concession. No, Flamel said. That is what makes him genuinely dangerous, and why ordinary moral arguments have no traction with him. You cannot tell Albus Dumbledore that stealing is wrong, because in his framework he is not stealing, he is allocating. You cannot tell him he hurt Harry, because in his framework Harry was being protected from a world he wasn't ready for. He looked at Harry. He has probably already constructed a narrative in which everything he did to you was an act of love and sacrifice. I know, Harry said. Which is why the tribunal doesn't rely on moral argument. It relies on law. Flamel nodded slowly. Laws he cannot reframe. He can reframe theft as stewardship. He cannot reframe a violation of the Concordat. He looked at Ragnarok. You chose the right ground to fight him on. The boy chose it, Ragnarok said, without inflection. Flamel looked at Harry again, with those deep-water eyes. I will come to the confrontation, he said. And I will testify. He paused. I should tell you something else. Albus has a plan for you, he has had it since the night your parents died. He told me, years ago, before it happened, in the way that Albus tells you things to reassure himself. He believes you are destined to face Voldemort again. He has been preparing you for that role without your knowledge. A pause. He will use that, in his defense. He will say everything he did was in service of that necessity. He managed my entire life, Harry said, to produce a weapon. He would say a hero, Flamel said. He would mean the same thing, but say hero. The room was quiet. It doesn't change anything, Harry said. Whatever he planned me for, that's his plan, not mine. My parents are dead and 30 other families have been robbed and my godfather spent 11 years in Azkaban. He looked at the map. Whatever he thought he was building me into doesn't give him the right to any of it. Flamel looked at him for a long moment. No, he agreed. It doesn't. The letter went out the following Tuesday. Harry wrote it himself, which Pemberton approved after suggesting 3 small changes that Harry accepted because they were genuinely improvements. It was formal, measured, and extended the invitation in terms that made acceptance look like Dumbledore's idea, acknowledging his letter, expressing interest in meeting, suggesting that a neutral location under Concordat oversight would be appropriate given the legal questions currently before the Wisengamot clerk's office, easily sorted out, as the headmaster himself had said. It was, Harry thought, a perfectly constructed mirror of Dumbledore's original letter. Warm. Kind. Completely concealing the trap underneath. The response came in 2 days, in purple ink, expressing Albus Dumbledore's genuine delight and suggesting the following Thursday. Harry wrote back, Thursday is perfect. Dumbledore arrived at 10 in the morning wearing deep blue robes and an expression of benevolent warmth so complete and natural it was either genuine or the most accomplished performance Harry had ever witnessed. He was tall, which Harry had known, and old in a way that read as timelessness rather than decay, with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles and eyes the color of a summer sky that moved across the room with the alert intelligence of someone who had walked into meetings knowing he was the most capable person in the room for so long that it had become unconscious. He saw Ragnarok and his expression shifted, not by much, just a fraction of recalibration, a tiny adjustment like a ship correcting course. He saw Flamel, and the recalibration was larger, quieter, and significantly more controlled. He saw Sirius Black, and for just a moment, half a second, gone before it fully formed, something moved through his face that was neither warmth nor calculation. Then he saw Harry. And he smiled, with everything in his face, with his eyes and his posture and his hands spread slightly in a gesture of openness, the smile of a man meeting something he had looked forward to for a very long time. Harry, he said. Just that, just the name, with a warmth in it that was entirely genuine in the way that the most dangerous things often are. Harry looked at him steadily. Headmaster Dumbledore, he said. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression at the formality, there and gone, but Harry caught it. He'd expected Albus. Or at least some reciprocal warmth. He'd been expecting a child. They sat across the table from each other, and Ragnarok was at the head, and Flamel was at the corner with a recording quill in front of him, and Apollon was against the wall with the formal witness posture that the Veela Council used for legal proceedings. Sirius sat beside Harry, not performing anything, just present. I should explain the format, Harry said, before Dumbledore could establish his own tone. This meeting is being conducted under Concordat formal inquiry provision, which means everything said here is recorded by Gringotts and can be submitted as testimony in any Concordat jurisdiction proceeding. You were notified of this in the letter. I was, Dumbledore said, pleasantly. I have no objection to transparency. He looked across the table at Harry with those summer sky eyes. I must say, Harry, I'm so pleased to finally meet you. You look remarkably like your father. The eyes, though, are entirely your mother's. I've been told, Harry said. Let's start with the proxy documentation. Another small recalibration. He'd expected small talk. He'd expected to spend 20 minutes warming the room before anything difficult came up. Of course, Dumbledore said. I imagine the clerk's office error is what prompted all of this. It's a simple matter. In the aftermath of Voldemort's fall, I took on emergency proxy authority for several houses that had lost their primary representatives, to prevent those votes falling into undue influence during a very unstable political period. I've always intended to transfer them back at the appropriate time. At what point did you intend that transfer to occur? Harry asked. When you were properly established at Hogwarts, naturally, with full access to guidance and the Pruitt proxy, Harry said. Gideon and Fabian Pruitt died in 1981. The hereditary claim defaulted to Ginevra Weasley through her mother's line. The Weasley family is not in political instability. Why does that proxy still exist? A pause. Small, controlled. The Weasley family, while admirable, is not positioned to exercise a lordship seat with the degree of informed strategy that the current, the Abbott proxy, Harry said. Hannah Abbott is 10 years old and her family's title has been voting under your direction for 7 years. The Abbotts have no wartime losses, no instability, no reason for proxy protection of any kind. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. The Macmillan proxy. The Selwyn proxy. The Knott proxy, which you filed in 1976, which is 5 years before the war ended. He set Sharpthorn's ledger down on the table between them, open to the relevant page. Would you like to explain the emergency wartime provision that applied in 1976? Dumbledore looked at the ledger. Then back at Harry. For the first time since entering the room, the benevolent warmth was doing something different. It wasn't gone, it was too ingrained, too automatic to disappear entirely, but underneath it something sharpened. The intelligence that had been turned down to a comfortable warmth turned back up to what it actually was, and Harry felt the full weight of it across the table and met it without moving. You have done considerable research, Dumbledore said. Gringotts did the research, Harry said. I did the reading. I see. Dumbledore looked at Ragnarok. You've been thorough, as always. We are a bank, Ragnarok said. We track assets. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice shifted slightly, still warm, but with a new register in it, something more direct, more genuine, that Harry recognized as the man stopping performing and beginning to actually engage. Let me be honest with you. Some of what you've found is more complicated than it looks from the documentation alone. The decisions I made, and yes, some of them were unilateral decisions I made without consulting the heirs, were made under extraordinary circumstances, with the welfare of the wizarding world as my primary concern. I don't expect you to agree with all of them. But I do want the chance to explain the context. Explain it, Harry said. Please. That's why you're here. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, a real look, a full attention look, and seemed to arrive at the decision that the child across the table was not going to be manageable in the way he'd planned. Very well, he said. When Voldemort fell, the Wizengamot was in chaos. Half the seats were vacant, held by the families of Death Eaters who'd been imprisoned, or by families who'd been killed. The other half were in shock and disarray. Into that vacuum, if left unfilled, would have moved, I say this with complete seriousness, the remnants of Voldemort's movement. The families who'd supported him but hadn't been caught. The opportunists who saw chaos as invitation. He looked at Harry with that genuine intelligence turned fully up. I filled the vacuum. I held the center while the ministry rebuilt. I am not ashamed of it. I understand that argument, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked slightly. It's a rational argument, Harry continued. For 1981 and 1982, it might even be a defensible one. But the Not proxy from 1976. The Bones proxy from 1973. Those aren't post-war emergency measures. Those are strategic acquisitions made years before Voldemort fell, when the war was still active and your justification for holding those votes was, he gestured at the ledger, what, exactly? Silence. And the votes themselves, Harry said. 1979, the motion to allow wartime detention without charge. Your proxies provided 6 votes in favor. My father voted against it. That motion gave the ministry the tools that eventually put Sirius in Azkaban without trial. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. Was that for the good of the wizarding world? Dumbledore looked at Sirius. Something moved through his expression. Sirius, he said, quietly. You'll address what he asked, Sirius said, flatly. Not violently, just very final. Dumbledore looked back at Harry. No, he said. That outcome was not intended. But the vote was cast. Yes. Using my family's name. A long pause. Yes, Dumbledore said. More quietly. And the Potter Lordship proxy, Harry said, keeping his voice exactly even. Filed 6 weeks after my parents were murdered. While I was in a cupboard at my aunt's house. He let that land. What was the emergency provision that justified that one? The room was very still. Flamel had not moved since the meeting began. He was watching Dumbledore with an expression that Harry couldn't entirely read. It was the expression of someone watching a person they've known for a long time do something they'd always worried they might. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter across the table and seemed, for the first time in the meeting, to be genuinely uncertain. Not of his position, Harry didn't think Dumbledore had genuinely doubted his own position in a long time. But uncertain of how to present it, how to frame it, how to give it to this child who was looking at him with Lily's green eyes and James's stubborn jaw and something in the set of him that belonged to neither parent and only to himself. Your safety, Dumbledore said finally. My safety required you to vote in the Wisengamot using my family's titles. Your safety required me to have the political authority to protect you. To keep your existence quiet, to prevent Voldemort's remaining supporters from locating you, to ensure that the narrative around your parents' deaths didn't destabilize into something that would put you in the center of a political storm before you were old enough to handle it. Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. You were 1 year old. I'm 10 now. Harry held Dumbledore's gaze. And I'm handling it. Silence. You are, Dumbledore said. And there was something in his voice when he said it that was, unexpectedly, genuine, not warmth performance, not strategic acknowledgement, but actual recognition. He was looking at Harry and seeing him, possibly for the first time, as something other than the outcome of his own plans. You are, rather remarkably, handling it. Here is what happens next, Harry said. I'm not making this contingent on your cooperation, because the Concordat doesn't require it. The blood examination report is already archived. The legal case is being built by Gringotts' legal team with Veela counsel support and 2 external specialists. The tribunal will happen whether you engage with it or not. He set his 4-ringed hand on the table, not aggressively, just present. But I'm giving you the option to engage. Because the outcome if you do engage cooperatively is significantly different from the outcome if you don't. Dumbledore looked at the rings. At Potter, Peverell, Gryffindor, Ignotus. What do you want? He asked. The proxies returned. Publicly, formally, on the record. All 26. The affected families notified and their titles restored. A formal statement to the Wizengamot acknowledging the irregularities and your responsibility for them. Harry paused. And Sirius's formal exoneration through the Wizengamot, supported by your testimony about the Secret Keeper recommendation and Peter Pettigrew's likely survival. Dumbledore looked at Sirius again. This time Sirius looked back, and whatever was between them was complicated in ways that went beyond the meeting, beyond the case, into something older and more personal. What you're describing, Dumbledore said, carefully, would end my tenure as Supreme Mugwump. Yes, Harry said. It would remove me from effective political power in the Wizengamot. Yes. It would significantly limit my ability to, he paused, and chose the word with visible care, prepare for what's coming. Voldemort is not gone, Harry. He was diminished, not destroyed. And when he returns, if he returns, Harry said, that's a separate conversation. This one is about what you took. A long silence. Flamel spoke, for the first time since the meeting began. He said, quietly but with the weight of 600 years behind it, Albus. I have watched you make yourself indispensable for 40 years, and every time you've done it, the justification has been bigger than the last. Grindelwald was real. Voldemort was real. But the habit of acquiring power for protection, he paused, the habit doesn't end when the emergency ends. And at some point the difference between protection and control stops being visible to the person exercising it. Dumbledore looked at Flamel. Something moved through his face that was private and old and hurt. Nicholas, I am here as a witness, Flamel said. I am saying this as a witness so that it is on the record. I am not saying it to wound you. I am saying it because I've been failing to say it for 30 years. The room was quiet for a very long time. Then Dumbledore looked down at his hands, his own hands, ringless, folded on the table, and seemed to be calculating something that wasn't tactical. Something more personal. The expression on his face was the expression Harry had seen once on a very old photograph of his father, in a moment before a decision, and it caught him off guard with a pain he hadn't expected. I will need to consider what you've asked, Dumbledore said. I will not give you an answer today. I ask for 2 weeks. 1 week, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. 1 week, Harry said again, because the tribunal date is already being set, and the amount of time your answer gives you is the amount of time I have to file the amended charges before the deadline. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. 1 week, he said. Very well. He stood. He looked at Sirius, and said, quietly, I am sorry for what happened to you, Sirius. I am genuinely sorry. That was never, I know, Sirius said. Flat. Not forgiving, not refusing forgiveness, just placing it somewhere to be dealt with later. 1 week. Dumbledore nodded. He looked at Harry one final time, and there was something in the look that was different from any expression he'd worn during the meeting. Something that was simply, plainly, an old man looking at a child and having a thought he hadn't prepared himself to have. Then he turned and walked out of the circular room, and the door closed behind him, and the recording quill set itself down. Everyone sat still for a moment. He won't cooperate, Sirius said. I know, Harry said. But now he knows we're not going to stop. And that's worth the meeting. You didn't expect him to agree, Apollon said. Not a question. I expected him to learn that the case is real, that it's wide, and that we're not afraid of him. Harry looked at the map. In a week he'll have talked to his allies in the ministry and they'll have confirmed that the Concordat filing is legitimate. He'll have talked to his legal advisors. He'll have sat with it. A pause. And then I want to know who he calls. You want us to watch his communications, Ragnock said. I want to know who panics, Harry said. Because the ministry people who've been benefiting from his proxy votes, the ones who got their positions because he swung 26 votes their direction, when they find out what's coming, some of them will try to help him and some of them will try to get clear of him. He looked at Ragnock. The ones who try to get clear first are the ones we can work with. Ragnock looked at him. We can track formal communications in and out of the Gringotts legal correspondence archive, Sharpthorne offered, from his corner. That would be sufficient, Harry said. Flamel was watching Harry with those deep-water eyes. James Potter, the old alchemist said, to no one specifically, would have been simultaneously very proud and extremely alarmed. Sirius made a sound that was half laugh, half something rougher. That's accurate, he said. Harry didn't respond to either of them because he was already looking at the map again, and the work wasn't done. The week passed. Dumbledore's communication went to 6 people. 3 ministry officials, including, notably, Cornelius Fudge, 1 member of the Hogwarts Board of Governors, and 2 Wisengamot senior members whose names Pemberton recognized immediately as longtime Dumbledore allies. The 6th communication went to a name that Harry didn't recognize, Marcus Bellwether, a mid-level ministry legal consultant whose office sat in a building 3 streets from the ministry proper. Who is Bellwether? Harry asked. Pemberton looked at the name for a long moment. He was the legal advisor who processed the original proxy filings in 1981 and 1982. He looked up from the document. He signed off on them. Harry looked at the name. He knows they were irregular. He signed off on them, Pemberton said again, which was the same thing. He'll be looking for immunity, Sirius said. He'll be looking for whoever offers it first, Harry said. He looked at Ragnarok. Can we make that offer? Goblin legal immunity in exchange for full testimony about the proxy filing process and any instructions he received, Ragnarok said. Yes. Standard practice for accessory witnesses. He paused. You want him before Dumbledore makes a counter-offer. I want him today, Harry said. They sent the offer that evening. Bellwether responded before breakfast the next morning. The week ended without a reply from Dumbledore. Harry had expected this. He'd told Sirius and Ragnarok and Pemberton that he expected it, and he'd been right, and there was no satisfaction in the rightness of it, just the practical forward movement of the case to its next stage. We file the full charges, Harry said. Ragnarok, the tribunal date, what are we looking at? 8 months, Ragnarok said. Given the international components and the Veela Council's formal participation, we need that window to prepare the full evidentiary record. 8 months, Harry said. He'd be 11 by then. Not quite Hogwarts age yet, which meant he'd attend the tribunal before he ever attended a class, which struck him as exactly backward and also exactly right. Good. Use all 8 months. I want the case airtight. And in the meantime? Apollon asked. In the meantime, Harry said, we notify the affected families. A silence. Harry, Pemberton said carefully. That will alert Dumbledore's allies to the full scope, I know. But those families have a right to know. He thought of Neville Longbottom, whoever he was, growing up not knowing what was his. He thought of Hannah Abbott and the Pruitt Lordship and Ginevra Weasley's mother who didn't know she'd been robbed. We've been quiet for 6 months. We're done being quiet about the human part of it. No one argued. We do it carefully, Apollon said. Each family notified privately, by secure Goblin post, with documentation. No public announcement yet, but they know. Yes, Harry said. They know. He looked at the map one last time, all those red threads, all those connections, the architecture of 30 years of brilliant and wrong decisions. He thought about Dumbledore walking out of the circular room. He thought about the expression on the old man's face in that last moment, not defeat, not guilt, but something that had looked, unexpectedly, like recognition. He didn't know what Dumbledore would do with 8 months. But he knew what he was going to do. 2 days later, a letter came to Grimmauld Place. Not purple ink. Ordinary black, on plain parchment, in handwriting Harry didn't know. Dear Harry Potter, my name is Neville Longbottom. I received a letter from Gringotts Bank 3 days ago. I have been reading it over and over. I don't entirely understand everything it says, but I understand enough. I wanted to write to you because your name was on the documentation as the coordinating claimant, and because whoever organized this, whatever is happening, I want you to know that I want to help. However I can. My gran says I should be cautious. My gran is usually right. But I'm writing anyway. Yours, Neville Longbottom. P.S. The letter also said something about a lordship ring in a vault I didn't know I had. Is that real? Harry read it at the kitchen table with Sirius leaning over his shoulder. Yes, Harry said, to the letter. It's real. He got up to find writing paper. Chapter 4, The Veela Council's Gambit. Neville Longbottom arrived at Grimmauld Place on a Saturday with mud on his boots and his grandmother 3 steps behind him. Augusta Longbottom was not a woman who entered rooms so much as she assessed them on arrival and decided whether they'd passed. She wore a hat with something stuffed that Harry chose not to identify, walked with a cane she clearly didn't need, and looked at Harry when he opened the door with the sharp-eyed evaluation of someone who had learned not to take things at face value and hadn't unlearned it since. Neville, behind her, was round-faced and slightly anxious in the way of someone who was used to being anxious and had made peace with it as a personality feature. He was taller than Harry, which wasn't difficult, and had the look of someone who'd spent his life being told he wasn't quite enough of something and had started to believe it. He looked at Harry's rings first. Then at Harry's face. Then he said, "You're actually real," which was not the most elegant opener Harry had ever received but was completely genuine, and that counted for more. "Come in," Harry said. "Both of you." Augusta Longbottom's cane came down on the threshold with a decisive sound. She looked around the hallway of Grimmauld Place, which Sirius had been systematically de-black-familying for 3 months with the focused energy of a man processing 11 years of grievances through interior decoration, and said, "This was a dark house." "It's getting better," Sirius called from the kitchen. "You're Sirius Black," Augusta said, moving toward the voice with the inevitability of a woman who has decided to do something. "I am," Sirius said. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, and whatever Augusta saw in his face made her assessment shift by a fraction that wasn't visible to most people. Harry caught it. "Mrs. Longbottom. Please come and sit down. There's tea." Augusta looked at him for one more moment. Then she nodded, the kind of nod that means I'll withhold judgment for now but I'm watching, and went into the kitchen. Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked back. "She's actually very pleased," he said quietly. "She just doesn't show pleased in a normal way." "Good to know," Harry said. "Come on. We have things to show you." They spent the morning with the map. Neville asked better questions than Harry had expected. Not sophisticated legal questions, he didn't have the background for those yet, but human ones, the kind that cut to what things actually meant rather than what they were formally called. When Sharpthorne's copy of the Longbottom proxy documentation came out, Neville read it with a very still face and then said, "He filed this 3 months after my parents were put in St. Mungo's." "Yes," Harry said. "While my gran was fighting to get me recognized as a magical child because some people thought," Neville stopped. "Reorganized. Because some people thought I might be a squib. While we were dealing with all of that. He stopped again. Filed the paperwork," Harry said. "Yes." Neville looked at the document for another moment. Then he set it down very carefully on the table, which Harry recognized as the gesture of someone who was angrier than they were showing. Augusta, across the table, had been watching her grandson. Something in her expression had shifted, a softening, barely perceptible, in the particular set of her jaw. As if she'd been waiting for Neville to show that specific quality and hadn't been sure he would. "What do you need from us?" she asked Harry. Directly, no preamble. "Neville's testimony about what it's been like not knowing about the Lordship," Harry said. "And yours, about the period after Frank and Alice were, after 1981. Specifically, whether anyone contacted you about the Longbottom political titles, or actively discouraged you from looking into them." Augusta's expression did something precise and contained. "Several people suggested, in 1982 and 1983, that the Longbottom estate matters would be best handled quietly and without engaging the Wisengamot directly. Those suggestions were attributed to, she paused. Dumbledore? Harry said. His office, Augusta said. Never directly. Always through intermediaries. I was told it was for Neville's protection. Harry looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at Sharpthorn, who was already writing. I'd like you both to give formal statements, Harry said. Ragnarok's people will take them today if you're willing. It doesn't have to be long, just what you know, what you were told, what it cost. Neville was still looking at the proxy document. Then he looked up at Harry. You're building this case to take him down, he said. Not a question, not an accusation. Just an assessment. I'm building the case to take back what was taken, Harry said. From 26 families. That includes yours. Neville was quiet for a moment. Can I, he started. Stopped. Tried again. Is there anything I can do? Not just the testimony. Actually do. I want to actually do something. Harry looked at him for a moment. He thought about what Neville was, not what his grandmother had said he was, not what the wizarding world probably thought he was, but what he was, a kid who'd grown up in the shadow of his parents' tragedy, who'd been told he wasn't enough, who'd read a letter from Gringotts 3 days ago and written to a stranger anyway. Can you talk to the other families? Harry said. The ones your age, Hannah Abbott, the Pruitt claim through the Weasleys. When we notify them, some of them will need someone to talk to who isn't a legal specialist or a goblin. He paused. Someone who's been through the reading of it. Neville looked at him. Something settled in his expression, not dramatically, not a big moment, just a quiet click of something finding its place. Yes, he said. I can do that. The Veela Council's formal delegation arrived in London on a Thursday in March, 3 weeks after the Longbottom visit, and it was not small. Harry had expected perhaps 4 people, Apollon, Fleur, 2 officials. What came through the side entrance of Gringotts was a group of 11, all with the silver-blonde Veela bearing and the precise carriage of people who knew how they looked and had decided it was useful rather than something to manage. They moved through the marble corridor like a weather system, and Miriam Clearwater, who was escorting them, looked very professional and very slightly overwhelmed. Apollon was at the front. Fleur was 3 people back, wearing formal Veela Council robes that were simultaneously more dignified and more dramatic than anything Harry had seen her in before, and she caught his eye as she came through the door and gave him a look that communicated several things simultaneously, the primary one being "This is bigger than I told you it was going to be," without apologizing for it. The head of the delegation was a woman named Evangeline Laurent. She was perhaps 50, silver-haired, and had the quality of someone who had negotiated with governments and found most of them somewhat disappointing. She looked at Harry when he stepped forward to greet the delegation and performed a very precise assessment that took approximately 2 seconds. Lord Potter, she said, which was the first time anyone had addressed him with the full title, and Harry filed away how it landed without reacting to it visibly. The Council thanks you for your cooperation with the Concordat process. The Council's support has made the case possible, Harry said. Please sit down. We have a great deal to discuss. The circular room had been expanded by Goblin means to accommodate 11 additional people, which Harry hadn't asked how they'd managed and wasn't going to. Everyone settled with the specific choreography of a delegation that had done this before, and Evangeline Laurent opened a folder that appeared to contain approximately 80 pages. There are developments, she said, beyond the scope of the original blood examination findings. The Council has been conducting its own parallel inquiry for the past 6 months, following the examination results. What we have found, she paused with the precision of someone choosing to be concise, expands the picture significantly. Harry looked at her steadily. Show me. What the Veela Council had found was this: the proxy architecture wasn't only in Britain. It was smaller on the continent. The ICW had more structural oversight than the Wisengamot, which made large-scale proxy manipulation harder, but it was there. 3 French wizarding families with ancient Veela treaty ties had seen their international representative votes redirected over the past 20 years. 2 German families. 1 Dutch. Not through proxy seals, Dumbledore didn't have the same mechanisms on the continent. Through influence. Through his position as Supreme Mugwump, which gave him agenda-setting power at the ICW. Through his reputation, which in continental wizarding society was arguably even larger than in Britain. Through the simple, effective mechanism of being the most respected figure in European magical life and understanding exactly how to use that. None of this is in the Concordat filing, Apollon said, leaning forward. The Concordat only covers hereditary title proxies in Britain. The international material is separate, it requires a different legal mechanism. What mechanism? Harry asked. A formal complaint to the ICW under the Magical Nations Sovereignty Accords, Evangeline Laurent said. Which can only be filed by a signatory nation. She looked at Harry. The Veela Council is a signatory nation. We are prepared to file on the basis of the influence exerted over our treaty partner families. A pause, and she looked at him with that assessing gaze. We wanted to ask whether you wish to coordinate the British Concordat case with the international filing, or keep them separate. Harry thought about this for perhaps 10 seconds. Separate filings, coordinated timing, he said. If they drop simultaneously, he can't address them sequentially. He can't concede Britain to protect his ICW position or vice versa. He looked at Apollon. How long to prepare the ICW filing? 6 weeks, once we have access to the full British evidentiary record. We share everything we have with the Council as of today, Harry said. He looked at Ragnarok. Agreed, Ragnarok said, without hesitation. Evangeline Laurent looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Apollon, and something passed between them that was private and brief and seemed to constitute a confirmation of a prior conversation. There is one more thing, Evangeline said. And I say this not as a diplomatic matter but as a factual one. The Council's inquiry found that Dumbledore has been aware of the Veela Council's investigation for approximately 3 weeks. We have reason to believe he has become aware of the broader scope of what you are building. The room's temperature changed. He knows, Harry said. He suspects. The distinction matters, he doesn't have the specific documents, but he has enough to understand that what he's facing is larger than a proxy irregularity and a released prisoner. Evangeline's voice stayed even. He has been meeting with Cornelius Fudge 3 times in the past 2 weeks. He has also approached 2 members of the Wisengamot who had previously been approached by Gringotts with notification letters. He's trying to get to the affected families before we can consolidate them, Sirius said from his wall position. Which families? Harry asked. Evangeline named 2. Harry recognized both from the list, minor political houses, less directly impacted, less vocal. The kind of families that might be persuaded that letting it go was better than the disruption. Did he succeed? Harry asked. In one case, possibly. The Raoul family has not responded to our follow-up communication. Evangeline paused. The other family, the Folly estate, came to us immediately after Dumbledore's representative contacted them and told us everything that was said. Good, Harry said. What did Dumbledore's representative say? That pursuing this matter would damage the reputation of everyone involved. That the families would be exposed to scrutiny and their private financial histories made public. That it would be better for everyone to allow him to manage the restoration quietly and privately. Evangeline paused. He also implied that there was a significant dark threat returning and that fracturing the Wisengamot's effective leadership at this time was dangerous. He's using Voldemort, Harry said. He's using the possibility of Voldemort, Apollon said. Which is more effective because it's harder to disprove. Harry looked at the map. At the red threads. At the center where the Wisengamot sat. He'd known Dumbledore would fight back, he'd planned for it, Pemberton had drilled him in the likely counter-moves, Ragnarok had predicted the ministry pressure. He'd known all of it was coming and had kept it as abstraction until now. Now it was happening, and it was moving faster than 8 months. We need to accelerate the tribunal date, Harry said. Ragnar looked at him. The evidence preparation, we work faster. What specifically needs the full 8 months? Ragnar and Sharpthorn exchanged a look. Sharpthorn consulted his ledger. The full genealogical documentation of all 26 lines, 6 weeks. The complete voting record correlation, 3 weeks. Bellwether's formal testimony preparation, 2 weeks. He paused. The international coordination with the Veela Council filing, 6 weeks, which is the longest single track. The genealogical documentation and the international filing are running in parallel, Harry said. That's 6 weeks total, not additive. Voting records in parallel with testimony preparation. He looked at the numbers. 6 weeks for the longest track. We can be ready in 6 weeks. The tribunal requires 8 weeks' notice by Concordat Protocol, Ragnar said. File the notice today, Harry said. Set the date 8 weeks from today. Prepare the evidence in the 6 weeks before. 2 weeks buffer. Ragnar looked at him for a moment. We lose the 2-week buffer if anything goes wrong, he said. Then nothing goes wrong, Harry said. Fleur found him in the corridor after the meeting, in the specific way of someone who positioned themselves to find him there, which he noted without comment. Laurent liked you, she said, falling into step beside him. She was in the formal robes still and looked slightly restless in them. How can you tell? Harry asked. She didn't change expression once in 2 hours. She looked at you for 2 seconds longer than standard assessment when you named the coordinated filing timing. For Evangeline, 2 seconds is practically applause. Fleur glanced at him sideways. You moved faster than she expected. She brought new information. The strategy had to adjust. Most people need time to adjust. She paused. You adjusted in real time. Harry looked at her. Did you know about the continental findings before today? A fractional pause. I knew there were findings. I didn't know the scope. Did your mother know the scope? Another pause, slightly longer. She knew more than she told me. Not defensive, just honest. She was watching how I'd respond to a larger problem than I'd been handed, Harry said. Whether I'd panic or fold or start making concessions. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. That's how the council works. It's not malicious. It's practical. We work with a lot of people who perform very well with known quantities and fall apart when the scope expands. And you didn't. She said it simply, without the performance of a compliment, which made it land differently than flattery would have. You expanded with it. Harry thought about the map with its red threads and the 26 names and how they'd grown in 3 months from something British to something European. It's not a different problem, he said. It's the same problem, bigger. The method doesn't change. The method, Fleur said. What is your method? Harry thought about it. He'd never articulated it exactly. Find the law that applies. Build the case on that law. Don't let the person doing the thing define the terms of the conversation. He paused. And don't blink first. Fleur was quiet for a moment, walking beside him. Then, he's going to come for you directly. Not legally, he'll try to get to you personally. He'll try to establish a relationship because he genuinely believes that if he can make you feel known and valued and protected, you'll soften. I know. And will you? Harry looked at her. I've been alone my whole life, he said, simply, not for sympathy but as a fact. I don't soften when someone offers me what I've been missing. I know what it costs. Fleur looked at him with those gray-silver eyes, and the expression on her face was complicated in a way that Harry thought might need a few more years and a better vocabulary to fully understand. Good, she said finally. Don't. The letter from Dumbledore came the following Monday. It was longer than the first one. It began with genuine warmth. Harry, by this point, had learned to distinguish Dumbledore's genuine warmth from his performed warmth, and this was the former, which was almost worse, and moved through several paragraphs of what Harry could only describe as honest conversation. He wrote about Harry's parents. He wrote about James, specifically, with a specificity that felt like it cost something to put down on paper. He wrote about the war years and the choices made in impossible circumstances and the weight of believing yourself responsible for an outcome that nothing else could prevent. Then, at the bottom of the third page, he wrote, "I have been told that the investigation has expanded beyond Britain. I want you to know that I understand what this means, and I am not writing to obstruct it. I am writing because I believe we should speak again, not in a formal concordat proceeding, but simply as two people. You are the son of my dearest friends and the child I have tried, in the ways available to me, to protect. I accept that some of what I did was wrong. I ask only that you let me explain it to you as a person before it becomes purely a legal matter. I also want to tell you something about what's coming. Something you need to know about yourself, and about the night your parents died, and about why all of it matters beyond the proxies and the votes. Something I've been carrying for 10 years and have not told you because I was waiting for you to be ready. I think you are ready now. Come and see me at Hogwarts. Alone, if you're willing. No concordat recording, no legal observers. Just us." Albus Harry read it twice. Then he set it on the table and looked at it. Sirius, who'd been reading over his shoulder, said, "No." "I know," Harry said. "He's using your parents. He's using James specifically because he knows." "I know," Harry said again. "He's not lying, though. There is something he hasn't told me. The thing Flamel mentioned, the plan. Whatever he thinks I'm supposed to be." He looked at the letter. "He's using it as leverage, but the thing itself is real. That doesn't mean you go alone to Hogwarts." "No," Harry agreed. "It doesn't." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Flamel had mentioned a destiny. Dumbledore had built his whole architecture around it. Whatever it was, whatever had happened on October 31, 1981, it was connected to everything, including the 26 proxies, including Sirius in Azkaban, including the specific shape of Harry's life. He needed to know. But on his terms. He picked up his quill. "Dear Headmaster Dumbledore, I've read your letter carefully. There are things I want to know, and I appreciate your offer. I'll come to Hogwarts, but not alone. Sirius Black comes with me as my legal guardian, and the meeting is recorded by standard Goblin witness seal, which is not a concordat recording and carries no immediate legal implications, it is simply documentation. I will extend you the same courtesy you extended me and ask, is Thursday workable?" Harry Potter. He sealed it and handed it to Sirius. "Send it." Sirius looked at the letter. Then at Harry. "You're going." "We're going," Harry said. "He has information I need. And I want him to say it in front of you." He met Sirius's eyes. "Because whatever he tells me about my parents, you should hear it too." Sirius was quiet for a long moment. "Thursday," he said. "Fine." Hogwarts was overwhelming in the way that things are overwhelming when they're larger than all your anticipations of them. Harry had seen pictures, magical moving pictures in history books Pemberton had brought him. He'd read descriptions. None of it was the same as standing on the approach road in November and looking up at the actual castle rising out of the actual Scottish hills with its towers and its lights and the specific quality of magic rolling off it in waves that you felt in your chest rather than heard. "Your dad loved this place," Sirius said, beside him. His voice was different here than it was in London, quieter, fuller of something. "I can see why," Harry said. The castle met them at the door in the form of a stern-faced witch with grey hair pulled back so severely it suggested a structural commitment to severity. Professor McGonagall looked at Harry, then at Sirius, and something moved through her expression, old grief and recognition and several things fighting each other at once. "Sirius," she said, and her voice was not soft exactly but had a different texture than her face. "Minerva," Sirius said. She looked at him for a moment, really looked, the way people look when they're checking whether someone is still the person they remember. Then she stepped back. "The headmaster is expecting you. I'll take you up." Walking through Hogwarts with McGonagall was an experience of architectural excess, staircases that moved, portraits that watched, a magic so old and pervasive it didn't feel like a feature but like the building's inherent nature. Harry took in the scope of it without letting it show on his face, cataloging and moving. Dumbledore's office was exactly what Harry expected and also nothing like he'd imagined. Behind all the expected trappings, the moving portraits, the silver instruments, the magnificently impractical decor, was a room that felt like a person's interior. Too much in it. Everything significant and nothing quite organized. A room that reflected a mind that had been collecting and connecting for 150 years. Dumbledore rose when they entered. He looked at Sirius first, and the expression on his face was more complex than anything he'd shown at Gringotts, guilt and relief and a grief that was its own kind of acknowledgement. "Sirius," he said. "I'm not here for that conversation today," Sirius said. "Not cruelly. Harry first." Dumbledore looked at Harry. And there it was again, that genuine recognition, that look that belonged not to the performer but to the person underneath. "Please sit," he said. They sat. The Goblin Witness seal was activated by a small device Ragnarok had given Harry, not intrusive, just present, recording without broadcasting. Dumbledore looked at it and said nothing, which was its own concession. "What do you need to tell me?" Harry said. Dumbledore folded his hands. He was quiet for a moment, with the quality of someone arranging something heavy. "On the night your parents died," he began, "Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow to kill you. Not your parents, they were obstacles. You were the target." He paused. "This is because of a prophecy made 18 months before your birth. A prophecy that described a child born at the end of July, born to those who had thrice defied Voldemort, who would have a power Voldemort did not know, and who would mark Voldemort as his equal." He looked at Harry steadily. "The prophecy referred to you." Harry held this. "What power?" he said. "We believe it to be love, in the most literal magical sense. The protection your mother laid on you when she died, a willing sacrifice, a death chosen freely for another, created a ward so powerful that when Voldemort's killing curse struck you, it rebounded. It destroyed his body. It anchored something of his soul to you in the process." A pause. "A piece of Voldemort's soul has been residing in your scar for the past 9 years. The office was very quiet. "There's a piece of his soul in me," Harry said. His voice was completely flat. "Yes. We believe so. And you've known this since shortly after it happened." The magical signatures were consistent with a forced soul anchor, what the texts call a Horcrux. Voldemort made several such objects deliberately, pieces of his soul hidden to prevent permanent death. Yours was made accidentally, in the rebound. Dumbledore's voice was careful and precise and carried underneath it a weight Harry recognized as genuine sorrow. "I have been trying to determine what it means for you, specifically, whether it can be removed, what the implications are. I have been doing this for 9 years. Alone," Harry said. "Without telling me. Without telling Sirius." He looked at Dumbledore. "You decided, alone, to carry the knowledge that a piece of Voldemort was in my head and to not tell me, and to manage my life around that secret, for 9 years. You were a child." "I'm still a child," Harry said. Apparently that wasn't a reason when it came to living in a cupboard. Sirius made a sharp sound. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. "No," he said. "You're right. Those two facts exist in the same framework and I cannot reconcile them." He opened his eyes. "I am telling you now. Can it be removed?" Harry asked. "We believe so. When Voldemort is destroyed fully, not just his body but all his Horcruxes, We believe the peace in your scar will dissolve, because it is the most unstable of the anchors, created by accident rather than intention. He paused. But it requires Voldemort's full destruction, and that requires the prophecy, Harry said. The prophecy says that you have the power to vanquish him. That neither can live while the other survives. Dumbledore held his gaze. I have believed, since October 1981, that you would need to face him again. That you would need to be ready. That my responsibility was to prepare you. He let the silence sit for a moment. That belief is what drove many of my decisions. Including the ones that have brought us here. Harry held this for a long moment. He thought about the architecture on the map. He thought about 26 houses and 30 years of proxy votes. He thought about Sirius in Azkaban and his parents in Godric's Hollow and the cupboard under the stairs. And he thought about a prophecy, a piece of someone else's foretelling, being used as the justification for all of it. Let me ask you something, Harry said. Dumbledore waited. If the prophecy is real, Harry said, and if I have a role in whatever's coming, does that justify what you did? Do you actually believe that? Not as strategy, not as argument. Do you actually believe that the prophecy makes everything else acceptable? A long silence. I did, Dumbledore said. For a very long time, I did. He held Harry's eyes. I am less certain now than I have been. Because of this, Harry said. Because of what we've built and what we've found. Because of you, Dumbledore said. Because I expected to meet a child I could manage and I met you instead. Harry looked at him for a long moment. I'm not going to stop the tribunal, he said. Whatever's coming with Voldemort, that's separate from what you did. The prophecy doesn't make the theft legal. It doesn't put Sirius's years back. It doesn't give any of those 26 families back what they lost. He held Dumbledore's eyes. But I'm going to learn everything about the Horcruxes and the prophecy, and I'm going to deal with that too. On my terms. Not as a weapon you built, and not waiting around for whatever narrative you planned. Dumbledore looked at him. The summer sky eyes were doing something Harry hadn't seen before, not performance, not assessment, not even genuine warmth. Something that was simply, plainly, complicated. If you want to help, Harry said, with the Horcrux problem specifically, I'll take it. As information. As expertise. That's all. He paused. But the tribunal happens. The proxies are returned. Everything else proceeds. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with a tone that was neither concession nor refusal but something hovering between, I would like to think about what you've said. Think about it, Harry said. Come to the tribunal ready to be honest. That's all I'm asking. He stood up. Sirius stood with him. McGonagall, who had been a statue by the door, moved to open it. Harry was almost through when Dumbledore said, Harry. He stopped but didn't turn. Your mother, Dumbledore said. She would have found this extraordinary. What you've become. Not what I planned, what you've become. A pause. She always said that the most dangerous assumption anyone could make was to believe they knew better than Lily Potter. Harry didn't say anything. He walked out of the office and down the moving staircase and through the castle toward the November air outside, and he didn't say anything to Sirius for several minutes, and Sirius didn't push, and the castle moved around them with its old breathing magic, and eventually Harry said, There's a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head. I heard, Sirius said. That's, Harry stopped. That's a separate problem. Yes, Sirius said. But it's a problem. One thing at a time, Harry said. Harry, one thing at a time, Harry said, and his voice was steady, and it stayed steady all the way back to London, and it was only late that night in his room at Grimmauld Place, when the house was quiet and the work was done and there was nothing to be disciplined for, that he sat with the fact of what Dumbledore had told him and felt the weight of it, the specific loneliness of being told you are the center of a story you never chose, and let himself simply be 10 years old for a few minutes, in the dark. Then he got up and went to find his notes on Horcrux theory, because there was work to do. The Foley family arrived 3 days later with documentation. The Macmillan heir, a boy named Ernie, earnest and loud, wrote a letter so enthusiastic it covered 6 pages. Hannah Abbott's parents sent a careful formal reply, and then Hannah herself sent a separate, much shorter one that just said, "I'm in," whatever that means. H. Abbott. Neville, true to his word, had been writing letters. Long ones, patient ones, the kind that answered questions and offered no false comfort and made people feel less alone in what they were finding out. Harry read some of them over Neville's shoulder and thought that Neville Longbottom was significantly better at people than he was, and that this was useful. By the time the tribunal notice was formally filed, 11 of the 26 affected families had made contact. 3 were actively engaged. 2 had gone quiet in a way that suggested Dumbledore had reached them. 8 weeks. He'll make his move in the last 2 weeks, Sirius said, looking at the timeline. I know, Harry said. What's his move? Harry looked at the map. At the threads, at the center, at the 26 red dots. He thought about Dumbledore's office and the summer sky eyes and the prophecy that made everything feel both bigger and more specific. He'll file a counter-petition, Harry said. With the Wizengamot directly. Bypassing the Concordat. He'll argue that the blood examination overstepped its authority and that the proxy arrangements were legally valid under existing domestic law. He paused. He'll lose on the Concordat grounds, but it creates delay and makes the case look contested in the public eye. And the public eye matters, Fleur said. She'd come back 3 days ago with the formal ICW complaint documentation and had been working in the Gringotts study space they'd gradually occupied as a permanent satellite office. When this becomes public, and it will, regardless of the formal proceedings, how people perceive it matters. Dumbledore's reputation is his strongest defense. So we manage the narrative, Harry said. We don't leak, Ragnarok said firmly. That is not the Goblin way. We don't leak, Harry agreed. But when the counter-petition is filed, it becomes a public document. And we make sure the right people are ready with the right context when it is. He looked at Fleur. Does the Veela Council have contacts in the wizarding press? Fleur looked at him with that look that meant she was deciding how much to confirm. The council has contacts everywhere, she said. Then make sure the contacts understand what the counter-petition means when it appears, Harry said. Not our narrative. Just the correct context. What a proxy seal is. What the Concordat requires. What the voting record shows. He paused. Let the facts tell it. Fleur held his gaze for a moment. You're learning politics, she said, and it sounded like it surprised her slightly. I'm learning what my parents apparently already knew, Harry said. And what it cost them not to have had enough time to use it. The counter-petition arrived on a Thursday. Harry read it at the kitchen table at Grimmauld Place, with Sirius over his shoulder and Pemberton across the table and a cup of tea that had gone cold while he was reading. It was everything he'd predicted and slightly worse. Not only the procedural challenge to the Concordat Blood Examination Authority, but a formal challenge to Sirius's exoneration process, a filing questioning the legality of Harry's Lordship ring claims on grounds that the rings had been retrieved before formal tribunal confirmation of the proxy dissolution, and, this part Harry read twice, a sealed attachment filed under Wizengamot confidentiality that Pemberton said, based on its registration code, was almost certainly a submission of the prophecy. He filed the prophecy, Harry said. Pemberton looked at the registration code. The Unspeakables archive has a record of the original. He may be submitting it as context, framing your case as a threat to the precautions necessary for national security. He's going to tell the Wizengamot that disrupting his political control is a danger to Britain because it leaves them unprepared for Voldemort, Sirius said. Yes, Harry said. And some of them will believe it. The ones who remember the First War, it won't be hard to make them afraid. He looked at the counter-petition. How many Wizengamot members were adults during Voldemort's rise? Pemberton did a quick calculation. Approximately 60% of the current seated members were of adult age in 1981. Fear of Voldemort is his strongest card, Harry said. We need to address it directly, not dance around it. He thought for a moment. We need to establish that the prophecy, even if real, does not require the specific arrangements Dumbledore made. That there is no reading of the prophecy that demands Harry Potter be raised in ignorance of his heritage, or that 26 families be robbed of their titles, or that Sirius Black rot in Azkaban. The prophecy says I have a power Voldemort doesn't know. It doesn't say a word about proxy votes. You want to argue the prophecy in the tribunal, Pemberton said. I want the Wizengamot to see that he's using it as deflection, Harry said. That the existence of a dark threat does not retroactively justify theft. And I want them to see it from me, not from lawyers, not from goblins, not from Veela delegates. From me. Another silence. You want to address the Wizengamot directly, Ragnarok said. I'm a lord, Harry said. 4 times. I have the right to speak. Ragnarok looked at him for a very long moment. You do, he said. Then I will, Harry said. He set the counter-petition down on the table and looked at the cold tea. Can someone make fresh tea? We have 6 weeks to prepare and I want to start tonight. Chapter 5, Blood Law and Fire. The Wizengamot chamber smelled like old wood and older decisions. Harry stood in the antechamber the morning of the tribunal and looked at the double doors and felt, for the first time in over a year, the specific weight of what he was about to walk into. Not fear. Something more precise, the awareness of scale, of the distance between a circular room at Gringotts with 7 people in it and a legislative chamber with 200. Sirius was beside him, wearing robes that were a shade between midnight and ink, the first formal wizarding clothes he'd put on in 12 years, and he stood with the particular stillness of someone who had rehearsed exactly how he was going to hold himself today. Ragnarok was on Harry's left, in formal goblin regalia that Harry had only seen once before and that communicated, to anyone who understood it, that the Goblin King was here not as an advisor but as a claimant and a power. His crown was the full ceremonial version today, heavy and structural and very old. Behind them, the Veela delegation arranged itself with the natural precision of people who understood ceremonial space. Evangeline Laurent at the head, Apollon beside her, and behind them 9 others who moved like a single considered statement. Fleur was not in the delegation formation. She'd positioned herself 3 steps back from Harry, slightly to his right, which he'd noticed and which she hadn't explained and which he hadn't asked about because the positioning communicated itself clearly enough. Pemberton was absent from the antechamber. He was already inside, at the evidentiary table, which had been set up under concordat terms that had taken 2 weeks of negotiation to finalize with the Wizengamot administration. 3 attempts had been made to restrict Gringotts' participation to an advisory role. All 3 had been denied under concordat authority. The ministry had eventually stopped arguing and started looking nervous, which was progress of a kind. Neville appeared from the side corridor at 5 minutes to 9, Augusta at his shoulder, wearing robes that were new and fitted well and looking like someone who had decided this morning was a decision. He spotted Harry and came over. Ready? Harry said. No, Neville said. But I'm going in anyway. He paused. Hannah Abbott is already inside. She came with her parents and she's been there since 8. She looked very determined. Good, Harry said. 3 of the other families, Neville started. I know, Harry said. 3 didn't come. It's all right. What we have is enough. Neville looked at him for a moment. Are you nervous? Harry thought about it honestly. A little, he said. Good nervous, though. Like before something that matters. Neville seemed to find this reassuring in proportion to its honesty. He nodded and went back to Augusta, who had been watching the exchange with the expression of someone revising a prior assessment. The doors opened. The Wizengamot chamber was semicircular, tiered, with seats rising in curved rows from a central floor. The upper tiers were filled, Harry could feel the weight of eyes from the moment he walked in, the specific quality of attention that 200 people focused on a single point creates. Most of the faces were unfamiliar. Some were not. He spotted Fudge in the ministerial seat, already visibly unhappy. He spotted Amelia Bones at the head of the DMLE section, her expression professionally contained, her eyes tracking everything. He spotted Dumbledore. Dumbledore was seated in the respondent's position, not his usual seat, which spoke to a very particular procedural argument about how to categorize his presence today that had been one of the 2-week negotiations. He wore deep plum robes and sat with his hands folded on the table before him and his half-moon glasses in place, and he looked across the chamber floor at Harry when Harry entered and something passed between them that was beyond the public proceedings and belonged only to the conversation in his office. Harry held his gaze for a moment, then moved to his position. The Concordat Tribunal panel sat in elevated chairs at the chamber's head, 3 positions, Chief Gringotts Arbitrator, Veela Council Senior Representative, and Wizengamot Presiding Elder. The arbitrator was not Ragnarok. Goblin law required a separate judicial figure for proceedings in which the Goblin nation was itself a claimant, and the arbitrator, older goblin named Steelgrave, had the quality of pure process made manifest. The Veela representative was Evangeline Laurent, who had apparently made the transition from delegation head to tribunal panelist with the smoothness of someone who'd planned for it. The presiding elder was a witch named Griselda Marchbanks, 80 if she was a day, who'd been running Wizengamot proceedings for 30 years and had the demeanor of someone who was not going to let this get away from her. Marchbanks brought the chamber to order with a voice that needed no amplification. We are convened under the terms of the Goblin-Veela Concordat of 1889, renewed 1939, for a formal adjudication of claims arising from the mandatory blood examination conducted under Article 7, Section 4, of the said Concordat. The claims are as follows. She read them. All of them. 26 proxy violations, the banking accord breaches, the wrongful imprisonment petition for Sirius Black, the Islet Accord violations. It took 4 minutes and the chamber was completely silent for all of it, and Harry watched the upper tiers and saw the shape of the room, who was already pale, who was already angry, who was already calculating. The respondent, Marchbanks said, is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, currently headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, chief warlock of the Wizengamot and supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. A pause, with the specific quality of a pause that is itself a statement. The primary claimant is Harry James Potter, Lord of the Houses of Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, and Ignotus, Lord Apparent of 22 additional hereditary lines currently under Concordat challenge. She looked down at her parchment. We will begin with the evidentiary presentation. Pemberton presented for 40 minutes. He was extraordinary at it in the way that very precise people are extraordinary when the precision is exactly what the moment requires, no flourish, no performance, just the clean sequential construction of an inescapable argument. Each document introduced properly. Each date cited with its source. The voting record correlation, which had taken 3 weeks to compile, displayed on an expanded chart that made 26 years of redirected Wizengamot votes visible at a single glance. The proxy filing documentation with Bellwether's testimony, which had been taken formally and sealed and was now submitted and, when Marchbanks broke the seal, read in total silence. The chamber got quieter as it went on. Not the silence of boredom or patience, the silence of a large number of people absorbing something they hadn't known and weren't sure how to place yet. Some of them, Harry could see, had known some of it and were watching the shape of how much they hadn't known come into focus. Some of them were looking at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was looking at the evidentiary table with an expression of careful stillness. Fudge's face had gone through 3 shades during the Bellwether testimony and settled on something that suggested he was thinking about distances. When Pemberton finished, Steelgrave said, the respondent's legal representative may respond to the evidentiary submission. Dumbledore's representative was a witch named Hargrave, competent and clearly expensive, who stood and delivered a prepared response that did exactly what Harry had predicted, invoked the emergency wartime provisions, argued the legal validity of the proxy arrangements under domestic law, and submitted the sealed prophecy attachment as context for what she called the strategic necessity of the arrangements. Then she said, the respondent furthermore submits that the Concordat blood examination, while conducted in good faith, exceeded its jurisdictional authority when used as the basis for a domestic Wiesengemot proceeding, and that the proper venue for these questions is a domestic review board rather than an international tribunal. Steelgrave looked at her. The Concordat supersedes domestic law in matters of treaty compliance. This has been established by precedent no fewer than 14 times since 1889. Next point. Hargrave adjusted smoothly. The respondent also wishes to address the matter of Sirius Black, whose release was conducted under a petition the ministry respectfully maintains was, the Islet Accord breach is documented and acknowledged by the ministry's own filing records, Evangeline Laurent said, from the panel. This was not disputed when the petition was filed. The ministry's objection was procedural, which was addressed at that time. We will not revisit procedurally resolved matters. A pause. Next point. Hargrave looked at her notes. She was, Harry could see, burning through prepared material at a pace she hadn't planned for. The respondent requests that the prophecy submission be heard as context for, we will hear it, Marchbank said. In its proper sequence, which is after the primary evidentiary response, not before. She looked at Hargrave with the expression of someone who has been running proceedings for 30 years and can see every attempt to redirect from 3 arguments away. Is the primary evidentiary response complete? Hargrave looked at Dumbledore. Something passed between them. The respondent, Hargrave said, and there was a slight change in her tone, something that hadn't been there before, wishes to make a direct statement to the panel. Marchbanks raised her eyebrows a fraction, which on her face was the equivalent of significant surprise. Direct respondent statements were unusual. They opened the respondent to immediate questioning from the panel and from opposing claimants. The respondent is aware of the implications of a direct statement. Marchbank said. Another look at Dumbledore. He nodded once. Very well, Marchbank said. Proceed. Dumbledore stood. He didn't use his representative's position. He stood at the respondent's table itself, and the chamber shifted in its attention the way it shifts when something unrehearsed begins to happen. He looked across the floor at the panel, and then at the chamber, and then, briefly, with an intention that was clearly readable even from across the floor, at Harry. I will be brief, he said, because the evidence before this panel is accurate and I will not insult this chamber or the people it represents by attempting to dismember it. The proxy arrangements were made by me, over the course of 30 years, with the primary motivation of ensuring political stability in the Wiesengemot during and after a period of genuine crisis. He paused. I believed then, and I have believed until very recently, that my judgment in these matters was sound. That the outcomes of those votes justified the means by which I cast them. He looked at the panel steadily. I was wrong. The chamber absorbed this. Not wrong that the crisis was real. Not wrong that the Wiesengemot needed stability. But wrong that my judgment, my individual judgment, unaccountable, unchecked, was the right mechanism. Wrong that the end justified the means in the specific way I told myself it did. He looked down at his hands for a moment, and when he looked back up there was something in his expression that was not performance. I took things that were not mine. I did it believing it was necessary. And I have spent the last several months watching a 10-year-old child, the son of people I genuinely loved, demonstrate, with more clarity than I managed in 30 years, that necessity does not dissolve responsibility. The upper tiers were completely still. I am not asking for exoneration, Dumbledore said. I am asking that the record reflect that the acknowledgement is genuine and that I will cooperate fully with the restitution process. He paused. I also want to address Sirius Black. He looked across the chamber at Sirius, who was in the observer's gallery, and the look was direct and carried its weight. Sirius Black is innocent of every charge for which he was imprisoned. Peter Pettigrew is alive and was the true secret keeper for the Potter family. I recommended the change of secret keeper. I did so believing it was strategically sound, and I did not anticipate." He stopped. Something moved through his face. "I did not adequately consider what would happen to Sirius if things went wrong. That is on me, and I am sorry." He held Sirius's eyes across the chamber. "That apology is not sufficient. But I mean it absolutely." Silence. Sirius's expression was the expression of someone holding something very complicated very steady. "I support the tribunal's full authority in this matter," Dumbledore said. "I will not challenge its findings." He sat down. The chamber needed a moment after that. Marchbanks gave it 30 seconds, during which the only sound was the quiet of 200 people recalibrating. Then she said, "Lord Potter." Harry stood up. He'd prepared. Obviously he'd prepared, 6 weeks of Pemberton drilling him, Ragnock challenging every statement, Apollon critiquing his delivery, Sirius reading him the riot act about letting his expression tell the audience too much before his mouth did. He'd stood at the Grimmauld Place kitchen table and delivered the address 17 times and refined it each time and knew it so well it lived in his body rather than his memory. He stood up and looked at the chamber and felt the 200 faces and the weight of the panel and Dumbledore sitting at his table across the floor, and the 17 rehearsals went away because they'd done their job and now the thing itself was here. He spoke. "I was placed in a cupboard under a staircase at the age of 1, he said. His voice carried without needing to be projected, the chamber's acoustics did it, and something else too, some quality of the magic in this room responding to something in the blood of the person who held 4 lordships and the resonant rights of 22 more. I lived there for 7 years. My aunt and uncle knew what I was and treated that knowledge as a contamination to be managed. I did not know my parents' names until I was 6. I did not know why I had a scar on my forehead until I was 10. He looked at the chamber. This is not a grievance. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because these facts are the direct result of decisions made by one man, operating alone, without oversight, and because those decisions were made using the legal and political authority of 26 wizarding families who had no knowledge their names were being used. He moved from behind the claimant's table and walked a few steps forward onto the chamber floor, which was irregular enough that he saw several people in the upper tiers adjust their attention. The respondent acknowledged today that the proxy arrangements were wrong. I believe he means that, and I want the record to say that I believe he means it. He paused. But I also want the record to say this, the acknowledgement doesn't change what it cost. Neville Longbottom is 10 years old and his parents are in St. Mungo's and have been for 9 years, and for those 9 years the Longbottom title that should have provided his grandmother political standing and resources and a voice in this chamber was voting instead for the person who could have used that standing to help them. He looked up at the tiers. Nobody in this chamber voted to do that. But it happened in your chamber. With your names on the proceedings. He walked a few more steps. The counter-petition filed last month raised the matter of prophecy. Of dark threats. Of the strategic necessity of concentrated leadership in times of crisis. He held the chamber's attention steadily. I want to address that directly, because I suspect some of you found it a compelling argument and I want to explain why I don't. He looked at Dumbledore. I know about the prophecy. I was told about it last month in Hogwarts, and I sat with it, and I have thought about it seriously. He held Dumbledore's gaze for a moment and then addressed the chamber. The prophecy says I have a power that Voldemort doesn't know. It says neither of us can live while the other survives. It says nothing, about proxy votes, or lordship theft, or a child in a cupboard. Whatever dark threat is coming, meeting it doesn't require that this chamber function under fraudulent representation. In fact, he let a beat pass, if a genuine crisis is coming, you want a Wisingamot that makes its decisions with accurate votes. 26 fraudulent proxies concentrated in one person's hands is exactly how you get the wrong decision at the worst moment. Several people in the upper tiers were very still. I am 10 years old, Harry said. I have 4 lordship rings that are mine and 22 that I'm claiming on behalf of people who couldn't claim them because they didn't know they were there. I have a godfather who is alive because treaty law was stronger than political convenience. I am standing in this chamber because a blood test found what a blood test was designed to find. He looked at Marchbanks, and at Steel Grave, and at Evangeline Laurent. I'm not asking for anything extraordinary. I'm asking for what the law says is mine, and for what the law says belongs to 26 families, and for what the law says Sirius Black was owed 11 years ago. That's all. He walked back to his position and sat down. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then Amelia Bones, from the DMLE section, said, without standing, without procedure, just directly, because she was Amelia Bones and had apparently decided that this was the moment for it, I'd like to formally note for the record that the Department of Magical Law Enforcement was not provided with the Concordat examination findings at the time they were made, and that had we been, several of the matters before this tribunal today would have been addressed through DMLE channels much earlier. She paused. I intend to look into why we weren't. Fudge looked at her. She looked back at him with the specific quality of look that communicated, sit down and think carefully about what you do next. The formal testimony ran through the afternoon. Bellwether was first. He was a small man who had clearly spent 3 weeks deciding how to present himself and landed on extremely cooperative with the energy of someone who had made a deal and intended to honor every clause of it. He confirmed, in precise procedural detail, that the proxy filings in 1981 and 1982 had been irregular, that he had been aware of the irregularities, that he had been instructed by Dumbledore's personal secretary to process them without flagging, and that he had done so because Dumbledore's authority was considered effectively absolute in that period and nobody questioned it. Nobody, Pemberton noted for the record, except James Potter, who had filed 3 formal inquiries with the clerk's office in 1980 and 1981 requesting documentation of the proxy arrangements. All 3 inquiries had been routed away from the main archive and filed in a subcategory that would not generate automatic responses. The chamber, at this, made a sound that was not quite a reaction but was the collection of 200 people having a thought simultaneously. Augusta Longbottom's testimony was 12 minutes and demolished 3 of Hargrave's remaining procedural arguments by simply existing, an elderly witch with a cane and 30 years of documented effort to manage her family's affairs, who had been actively and specifically discouraged from investigating her son's political titles, and who had the correspondence to prove it. The Folly testimony, from a middle-aged wizard named Stephen Folly, covered what had been said to him by Dumbledore's representative and added details that the written record hadn't included, specifically, that he'd been told, verbally, that pursuing the claim would make his family a target for dark wizards who were watching for weakness in the current political structure. He used Voldemort's shadow against his own victims, Sirius said, very quietly, from the gallery. He wasn't speaking for the record. Just saying it. Flamel testified in the late afternoon. He was the only witness whose presence seemed to genuinely affect Dumbledore. Throughout the other testimony Dumbledore had sat with professional stillness, but when Flamel took the witness position something shifted in his face that was old and personal and had nothing to do with legal proceedings. Flamel was brief. He confirmed his 600-year relationship with the Goblin Nation. He confirmed his knowledge of Dumbledore's proxy arrangements, not in detail, but in general shape. He confirmed his own failure to raise the issue earlier. He said, with the weight of 6 centuries behind it, I am not here to condemn Albus Dumbledore as a person. I am here to confirm that what he did was known to me, and that my silence was its own failure, and that the correct response to a good person making wrong decisions is not to look away but to say so. He paused. I am saying so now, belatedly. The panel may weight my tardiness accordingly. Marchbanks, for the first time, looked at him with something that wasn't pure procedure. The final testimony of the afternoon was serious. He walked to the witness position with the specific quality of movement of someone who has been waiting for this for 11 years and is going to do it right. He sat down and looked at the panel and he spoke. He spoke about Godric's Hollow in the months before October 1981. About Dumbledore's recommendation to change the secret keeper. About Peter Pettigrew, who had been his friend, who had been trusted, who had chosen a different side and then chosen to disappear rather than face what that choice meant. About arriving at the ruins and finding the house destroyed and knowing, with the specific knowledge of a man who understood what had happened, that he had made the decision that led to it. He spoke about Azkaban. Not dramatically, he spoke about it the way you speak about something you've decided to be honest about because lying about it would be worse. He said what 11 years under Dementors did to a person. He said what it meant to hold on to his animagus form because it was the only thing the Dementors couldn't reach. He said what he'd thought about in those years. He didn't ask the chamber to feel anything specific about it. He just told them. When he finished, the chamber was so quiet you could hear the magical instruments on the walls doing their slow work. Hargrave had no questions for Sirius. The panel deliberated for 2 hours. Harry sat in the antechamber with Sirius and Neville and Ragnock and Fleur, and nobody performed anything. Sirius had his eyes closed and his head back against the wall. Neville was doing something with his hands that was either nervous energy or a stress management technique. Ragnock was sitting very still in the way of someone who had done everything that could be done and was waiting for the world to confirm it. Fleur was sitting beside Harry. Not close enough to be pointed about it, just close enough to be present. "You were good in there," she said, after a while. "Thank you," Harry said. "You looked angry when Bellwether confirmed the inquiries your father filed." "I was," Harry said. "But you didn't let it pull you offline." "I couldn't afford to." He looked at the doors. He was trying to figure it out, my dad. He'd found the edges of it. If he'd had more time, he didn't, Fleur said. Not cruelly. Just factually, the way she gave facts. No, Harry agreed. Silence. "The Veela Council," Harry said. "After this, whatever the outcome today, the ICW filing is next." "How long before that hearing?" 3 months, Fleur said. "And it will be harder than today. The ICW has more structural loyalty to Dumbledore than the Wizengamot does. His allies there are more numerous and more invested." She paused. "But Laurent thinks the British tribunal outcome will shift the calculation. Once this is on the record, his position at the ICW becomes more vulnerable. And the Horcrux problem," Harry said, which was the first time he'd mentioned it today, here, outside the formal proceedings. Fleur looked at him. "That's different." "It's all connected," Harry said. "He built the architecture for the prophecy. The prophecy is connected to the Horcruxes. The Horcruxes are connected to Voldemort. And Voldemort is connected to everything that started this." He looked at his rings. "I need to deal with all of it. Not because he planned me to, because it's actually in front of me and not dealing with it is worse." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "My mother would say that's either very mature or very reckless." "What would you say?" She considered. "Both," she said, and it wasn't critical, it was honest, and honest suited them. The doors opened. Marchbanks read the findings standing, in the manner of the Wizengamot's formal declaration protocol, which meant the chamber had reassembled and the 200 faces were present again. "On the matter of the 26 proxy arrangements," she said, "the panel finds by unanimous determination that the arrangements constituted a violation of hereditary title law, treaty commerce provisions under the Banking Accords of 1742, and the fiduciary responsibilities of a designated proxy holder under the Concordat terms. The proxies are hereby dissolved, effective immediately, and the affected titles returned to their rightful heirs or heir apparent claimants." She looked at her parchment. "The panel further finds that the affected heirs are entitled to a formal accounting of all votes cast in their name during the proxy period, and that any legislation passed by margins constituted by those proxy votes is subject to review under the Judicial Revision Clause." Several people in the upper tiers went still in a specific way that meant they were calculating what they'd voted for. "On the matter of Sirius Orion Black," Marchbanks said, and her voice had a slightly different quality now, something less procedural and more human, "the panel finds that his imprisonment was effected without trial, without formal conviction, and without legal basis under domestic law, Concordat law, or the Islet Accord. His imprisonment is hereby declared void ab initio, void from the beginning, as if it never legally occurred." He is entitled to full exoneration, to formal restoration of his civil and magical status, and to restitution from the ministry for the period of wrongful imprisonment. She paused. The panel also formally requests that the Auror Office open an active investigation into the whereabouts of Peter Pettigrew on the basis of evidence suggesting his survival. Amelia Bones was already writing. On the matter of the banking accord violations, Marchbanks continued, the panel finds in favor of the Goblin Nation's claimant position and directs that a full accounting of all vault activity connected to the proxy-held lordships be conducted under joint Gringotts and DMLE oversight. Any discrepancies in vault management during the proxy period will be subject to further proceedings. She looked up at the chamber. At Dumbledore. On the matter of the respondents' titles and positions, she said, and the chamber was completely still, the panel has considered the respondents' voluntary acknowledgement, which is noted and weighted in mitigation. However, the scale of the violations and their duration make mitigation insufficient to preserve positions held in public trust. She read from the parchment without inflection, which was its own kind of emphasis. Albus Dumbledore is hereby removed from the position of Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, effective immediately. The panel makes a formal recommendation to the ICW regarding his position as Supreme Mugwump, to be considered in that body's own proceedings. His position as Hogwarts headmaster is referred to the Board of Governors for review. She set the parchment down. The panel notes that these removals are not intended to constitute a finding of general bad character, but to reflect the specific incompatibility of those positions with the documented exercise of unaccountable power that this proceeding has established. She looked at the chamber one more time. These findings are binding under concordat authority and are entered into the permanent record. The tribunal is adjourned. The chamber did something then that wasn't quite a reaction, more like an exhalation, the collective release of something that had been held. Not celebration, not condemnation, just the sound of something very large settling into its new shape. Harry was in the corridor before most people had finished standing. Not running, just moving with the specific energy of someone who needed 5 minutes of not being watched. He found a window alcove somewhere in the ministry's upper level and stood in it and looked out at London, the real London, the Muggle London, the city that had no idea any of this was happening, and breathed. Sirius found him approximately 3 minutes later, because Sirius had gotten very good at finding Harry. He didn't say anything. He just came and stood beside him and looked out the same window. After a moment, Harry said, he lost the Chief Warlock seat. Yes, Sirius said. He still has Hogwarts, potentially. Still has his power base, just reduced. Yes. He's not finished, Harry said. He won't stop caring about the prophecy or about what he thinks I need to be ready for. He'll find another way to be involved. Probably, Sirius agreed. Harry looked at London. Good, he said. Sirius looked at him sideways. I mean it, Harry said. I don't want him finished. I want him, he thought about how to say it, I want him where I can see him. Where there's accountability. Where his expertise is available without his control. He paused. He knows things I need to know. About the Horcruxes, about Voldemort, about the prophecy. I'm not going to pretend he doesn't. That's, surprisingly not angry, Sirius said. I am angry, Harry said. About all of it, and especially about you. He looked at Sirius. But anger as a reason for a decision is usually the wrong reason. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. James said something like that once, he said. Almost exactly. We were 17 and I wanted to prank Severus Snape into the hospital wing for a month and James said, he paused, and his voice had the texture it got when he was somewhere else and fully present at the same time, he said that wanting to do something because it felt satisfying was exactly backwards from deciding whether to do it. A pause. He was usually right. Was he always this annoying about it? Harry asked. Worse, Sirius said. At least you let me agree before you get to the sensible conclusion. Harry looked out the window a moment longer. Then Ragnarok appeared at the end of the corridor, and behind him Flamel and Apollon and Neville with his grandmother, and further back Fleur, who caught Harry's eye and made a very small gesture with her head that meant come back, it's not over yet, and was correct. He pushed off the window and turned back toward them. The formal restorations were processed over the following week. Not all at once. 26 lordship titles required 26 separate documentation procedures, each with its own heir verification, vault accounting, and ring ceremony. Gringotts ran them in parallel with the efficiency of an institution that had been waiting to run them for over a year and had the preparation to match. Harry attended the ones where the heir was present, which was 11 of them. The rings were different for each person. Hannah Abbott's was a simple silver band that she looked at for a long time before putting on with a steadiness that was entirely her own. Ernie Macmillan put his on immediately and then got briefly emotional, which he covered with loudness, which seemed to be his mechanism. Neville's ring was gold with a deep green stone, and when it settled on his finger he looked at Augusta, who was standing against the wall, and Augusta's expression did something that was possibly the most human thing Harry had seen it do. "Your father would be very pleased," Augusta said, and that was all she said, but the way she said it made the statement the size of a room. 3 families hadn't come. Harry wrote to each of them personally, not pressuring, just leaving the door open and the information clear. 2 wrote back within the week. The 3rd, the Rowell claim, stayed quiet. Pemberton noted this without judgment and filed it for monitoring. The Pruitt claim, through the Weasley family, required a different process. Molly Weasley was the connecting heir, and she'd been notified by letter, and the response that came back to Gringotts was written in handwriting that suggested it had been written and rewritten several times before being sent. She would come in, she wrote. Next Tuesday, with Arthur. And she had to say, she didn't know what to say yet, but she would come in. She came in Tuesday, with Arthur, who shook Harry's hand with a fervor that communicated both gratitude and a significant curiosity about everything Harry was willing to tell him about Muggle technology, which Harry filed away for future interaction. Molly looked at the ring, the Pruitt ring, her uncle's inheritance, old warm gold, and then looked at Harry, and she said, with a directness that reminded him somewhat of a Paulin Delacour, "You did this. A 10-year-old did this." "With significant help," Harry said. "Don't," Molly said. "Not unkindly. Don't do that. I've been a mother long enough to know when a child is deflecting credit that's actually theirs." She looked at the ring. Then at Harry. "My brothers were good men. Gideon and Fabian. They didn't deserve," she stopped. "Put the ring on." "Thank you," she said. Sirius's restitution hearing was separate from the tribunal, smaller, faster, attended by Amelia Bones personally, who was conducting it with the thoroughness of someone who had looked at what her department had failed to do 11 years ago and was processing that in the way of people who take their work seriously. She asked serious questions for 2 hours. Factual questions, procedural ones, nothing designed to twist. At the end she signed the exoneration document and slid it across the table to him and said, "I owe you a formal apology on behalf of the department." "You weren't there," Sirius said. "I was," she said. "Not the night of, but the aftermath. I was a senior Auror in 1982. I should have raised the lack of trial documentation. I didn't." She held his gaze steadily. "I'm sorry." Sirius looked at the exoneration document. He'd been looking at his own name on it for a few seconds, in the way of someone making sure the thing is real. "I know," he said. "Thank you." Outside the hearing room, Harry was waiting. Sirius came out with the document in his hand and stood in the corridor for a moment and didn't say anything, which was fine, because Harry had learned exactly when Sirius needed not to say anything and when the silence needed filling, and right now it needed to sit. After a while Sirius said, "It's over." This part, Harry agreed. Sirius looked at the exoneration document one more time. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the inner pocket of his robes, over his heart, Harry noticed, and said, "What's next?" "Flamel has Horcrux documentation from his alchemical research that predates Dumbledore's work," Harry said. "I want to see it." And the Veela Council's ICW filing needs our full evidentiary record by Friday. And Pemberton thinks we should start building the file on Peter Pettigrew because Amelia Bones' investigation is going to need material we have that they don't. And school? Sirius said. You're 11 in July. Hogwarts letter presumably September. Harry thought about Hogwarts. About the castle and its breathing magic and the stairs that moved. Yes, he said. School. I want to go. Good, Sirius said. Though you'll probably terrify the professors. Only the ones who can't keep up, Harry said. Sirius made that laugh, the rough surprised one that was becoming more natural, more frequent, more like what it must have been before 11 years had happened to it. They walked out of the ministry together into the January afternoon, Sirius with his exoneration over his heart and Harry with 4 rings on his hand and 22 more in the formal record and something that wasn't finished yet but was irrevocably, definitively started. Chapter 6, Crowns That Cannot Be Stolen. Peter Pettigrew was found in Aberdeen on a Wednesday. Not by the Aurors. Amelia Bones' investigation was thorough and moving in the right direction, but the Gringotts tracking team found him first, because Gringotts had been looking for 3 months longer and had methods that didn't require warrants. He was living as a rat in the walls of a boarding house, which was either poetic or pathetic depending on how you looked at it, and when the Gringotts retrieval team cornered him he transformed immediately into his human form and tried to run, which didn't work, and then tried to talk, which also didn't work, because the retrieval team were goblins and not susceptible to whatever Pettigrew had spent 12 years perfecting. He arrived at a ministry holding facility on Thursday morning, warded with more containment charms than Harry had known existed, looking exactly like the kind of person who had spent 12 years as a rat, small, damp, with quick eyes that were always measuring exits. Amelia Bones personally conducted the initial interrogation under veritaserum, which was standard procedure for a case of this magnitude, and the full transcript was filed with both the DMLE and Gringotts archives before noon. It confirmed everything. Every detail of Sirius's account. The secret keeper arrangement. Peter's choice to go to Voldemort and trade the Potter's location for his own protection. The fake death, the missing finger, the 12 muggles killed not by Sirius but by Peter himself in the moment before he transformed. All of it, on record, under veritaserum, incontestable. Sirius got the news by flow from Amelia Bones directly, which was her own choice and was the right one. Harry was in the kitchen when it came through and watched Sirius take the call and watched his face while he listened, and it was the most complicated thing he'd seen a human face do, relief and grief and rage and something that had been waiting 12 years to be confirmed and was now confirmed and didn't feel the way waiting for something ever prepares you for it to feel. When Sirius closed the flu connection he stood still for a moment with his hand on the mantelpiece. Harry waited. He cried, Sirius said finally. Peter. When he was transforming back. He was crying and trying to explain and he stopped. He said he'd been scared. That Voldemort was going to kill him and he didn't have a choice. A pause. He believed that. Under veritaserum, he still believed that. Being scared doesn't make it right, Harry said. No, Sirius agreed. But it makes it human. He turned from the mantelpiece, and his expression had settled into something that wasn't clean or simple but was at least resolved. He'll be tried properly. Evidence, jury, the whole thing. A pause. Which is what should have happened to me. Yes, Harry said. And it will happen. Properly. He met Sirius's eyes. Are you all right? Sirius considered this with more honesty than the question usually got. Not yet, he said. But I'm going to be. Different kind of not yet than before. Harry nodded and went back to the papers he'd been working on, because Sirius didn't need hovering and the papers genuinely needed attention, and sometimes the most useful thing you could do for someone was stay in the room and not make it about them. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in February, the letter Harry had been waiting for arrived. Not the Hogwarts letter, that was months away yet. This one came by Goblin post, sealed with both the Concordat crest and the personal seal of Steelgrave, and it contained a single document, the formal scheduling notice for the final Wiesengemot session at which the full restitution record would be entered, the proxy dissolution confirmed as permanent, and the outstanding matter of Dumbledore's cooperation formally resolved. The session was in 3 weeks. It was the last piece. Harry read the notice at breakfast, set it beside his plate, and ate his toast before he said anything, because the toast was going to go cold and the notice wasn't. 3 weeks, he said. Sirius looked at the document from across the table. What outstanding matters? The formal restitution accounting. The permanent record entry. And, Harry set down his toast, Dumbledore agreed to a truth bind at the final session. It was part of the arrangement Ragnarok negotiated after the tribunal. Not full veritaserum, a voluntary truth bind, which is different, which is his choice, which means he goes in knowing that whatever he says is on record and verified. He paused. He agreed to answer questions from the floor. Sirius stared at him. He agreed to that. 3 days after the tribunal, Harry said. He sent Ragnarok a private communication. He didn't want it announced before today because he was working out the scope of what he'd address. Harry had spent a considerable amount of time thinking about why Dumbledore had done this. He'd arrived at an answer that wasn't entirely satisfying but was probably honest, because Dumbledore, at his core, was someone who believed in truth even when it cost him, and had spent 30 years in a framework where he'd convinced himself that his truths were bigger than other people's rights. Having that framework dismantled in a public tribunal had apparently done something to the framework. He wants to close it himself, Sirius said. On his terms. On documented terms, Harry said. Which amounts to the same thing at this point. He picked up his toast. We should tell the others. Neville's been asking about the timeline. The days before the final session had a specific quality, not the coiled spring tension of the tribunal preparations, but something steadier, like the particular pressure of a tide coming in that you know is coming and can't hurry. Harry spent the first week finishing the last of the Lordship ring documentation with Pemberton. The remaining titles, the 11 families who hadn't attended the initial restorations, had all, eventually, responded. Including the Rowell claim, whose heir turned out to be a 7-year-old girl named Patricia, being raised by her great-aunt, who had been contacted by Dumbledore's people twice more after the tribunal and had both times declined to respond, and then sent a letter to Gringotts that was short and definitive. We want our ring. Tell us when. That had been the one Harry was most pleased about, for reasons he didn't entirely articulate. The second week he spent with Flamel. This had been building for months. Flamel had been providing Horcrux documentation in installments, dense alchemical texts and theoretical analyses and historical case records that Harry had been reading with the focused attention he gave to anything that mattered and a growing sense that the picture assembling itself was large and dark and required considerably more than reading to address. He'd been building a working understanding of what a Horcrux was, how they functioned, what destroyed them, and why Dumbledore's projected approach, which was single-operative, secret, and sequential, was problematic on several grounds. He planned to handle them alone, Harry said, across the wide table in Flamel's study, which was in a building in Diagon Alley that looked from outside like 3 floors and was somehow inside 6. One by one, through the years, without telling anyone. Yes, Flamel said. He was annotating something in the margin of a text that was older than Britain, his hand moving with the unhurried certainty of 6 centuries of practice. And the last one. Me, Harry said. The last Horcrux, Flamel said carefully, is housed in you. Yes. His plan assumed, he chose his words, a specific sequence. That all the others would be destroyed first. And then that the piece in you would be destroyed last, in the moment of Voldemort's final defeat. In a way that, he stopped. In a way that I might not survive, Harry said. Flamel looked at him. He believed it was a possibility. He was not certain. But he intended to prepare you for that possibility without telling you it existed. Preparing you to accept death, essentially, without giving you the agency of knowing what you were accepting. He held Harry's gaze. I want to be clear that I do not believe it's necessary. The soul fragment in your scar is unstable, created by accident, not intent, tethered poorly. There are theoretical bases for removal without the method he envisioned. Harry held this for a moment. Not with panic, he'd had the first conversation with Dumbledore 5 months ago, and he'd been doing the reading, and he'd arrived at this conclusion himself 3 weeks ago and had been sitting with it since, because some things needed to be sat with before you could think clearly about them. He was going to let me die without telling me, Harry said. Or prepare me to be willing to die. While believing he was doing the right thing. He was going to give you the choice, Flamel said. At the end. When you were old enough and ready. But yes, the choice itself would have been shaped by 17 years of deliberate preparation in ignorance. He paused. It is, in its way, the most characteristic thing he's done. The genuinely good intention and the absolute certainty that he knew better than you what you needed to know and when. And the alternative, Harry said. Your theoretical removal method. Flamel leaned back. It requires a willing sacrifice of the Horcrux's anchor host. Not death, not physical death. But a willing surrender of the connection. A deliberate severing. He picked up one of the texts and opened it to a page he'd marked with a strip of ancient ribbon. An alchemical ritual, conducted by someone with the specific heritage requirements. He looked at Harry over the page. You have them, as it happens. The Peveril line carries it. The Deathly Hallows connection is not merely legendary, it is a specific magical inheritance that interfaces with soul magic in a way no other line does. Harry looked at the text. He couldn't read the language but he recognized the shape of the argument from Flamel's previous notes. Can we do it before Voldemort's return? We cannot do it safely while Voldemort has a corporeal anchoring anywhere in the world, Flamel said. The other Horcruxes act as stabilizers. Remove yours first and it could accelerate his timetable in ways we can't predict. He looked at Harry steadily. The sequence still matters. The others first. Yours last. But the last does not have to mean what he planned. The others first, Harry said. How many? We believe 6, excluding you. We have confirmed locations for 2. 3 are possible locations with strong evidence. 1 is unknown. He paused. This is going to take time, Harry. Careful, methodical time. I know, Harry said. Good thing I'm 11. He looked at Flamel. And good thing I have you. Flamel looked at him for a moment with those deep-water eyes. I have lived 665 years, he said. I have known perhaps 8 people worth the knowing in all of them. A pause. You are making a reasonable case for being one of them. Harry picked up the text. Show me the ritual, he said. The final session was held on a Thursday, which Pemberton noted was traditional, and Harry still hadn't asked why. The chamber was full again, if anything fuller than the tribunal, because word had traveled in the 3 weeks since the tribunal findings and the Wisengamot session had accumulated an audience that spilled from the upper tiers into supplementary seating that Harry hadn't known the chamber had. The press gallery was full. The diplomatic observers section had the Veela delegation and what appeared to be 4 representatives from continental wizarding governments Harry didn't yet know by name. He arrived with Sirius and Ragnak and Fleur, who was in full Veela Council formal dress and had been coordinating something with her mother and Laurent for the past week that she hadn't fully explained but which Harry suspected was about the ICW filing timing. She caught his eye at the door and gave him a nod that communicated both good luck and you don't need it, and he appreciated the combination. Neville was already inside with Augusta. Harry spotted him in the Hereditary Lords section, a section that had been considerably expanded for today's session, because there were now 23 properly seated lords where previously there had been 1, and the Chamber's administration had needed to reconfigure the lower tier to accommodate them. Neville saw Harry and raised a hand in greeting, and beside him Hannah Abbott gave a small wave that was somehow both professional and extremely Hannah. Harry took his seat. Dumbledore was at the session table, not the respondent's position this time, but an ordinary member's position, because he was still technically a Wizengamot member, stripped of the chief warlock chair but still holding the seat that corresponded to whatever title allowed him to sit here. He wore the same deep plum robes. He looked, Harry thought, like a man who had made a decision and was carrying it with the particular quality of people who have stopped managing their image and started just being present. Their eyes met across the chamber. Harry nodded once. Dumbledore nodded once. Marchbanks called the session to order. The first 2 hours were procedural. Formal entry of the tribunal findings into the permanent Wizengamot record. Formal confirmation of the 26 proxy dissolutions, read into record by name, which took 15 minutes and had a cumulative weight that increased with each name. Formal confirmation of Sirius Black's exoneration, with Amelia Bones standing to confirm that the DMLE had opened a Pettigrew prosecution and that the preliminary hearing had been set. Formal acknowledgement of the Gringotts restitution accounting, which ran to 40 pages and was entered into record in summary form with the full document archived. Standard procedure. The machinery of correction, which was slower and less dramatic than the machinery of wrong but was also, Harry thought, more permanent. At the third hour Marchbanks looked up from the agenda and said, with the particular tone of someone coming to the part they'd been waiting for, "The session now moves to the voluntary sworn testimony of Albus Dumbledore, who has agreed to address questions from the floor under a voluntary truth bind. The bind has been applied. Questions may be submitted through the session clerk." She looked at Dumbledore. "Are you ready?" "I am," Dumbledore said. The questions came from the floor in the order submitted. Some were procedural, confirmations of dates, of sequences, of specific decisions. Dumbledore answered them without evasion, because the truth bind made evasion feel like walking into a wall, and more than that, because he'd agreed to this and was keeping the agreement. Some questions were not procedural. One wizard from the upper tier, old enough to have been in the Wizengamot during the First War, stood and asked, "Did you ever intend to return the proxy votes? At any point in the 30 years you held them, did you plan to give them back?" A pause. The truth binds quality in the air, subtle but present, like a second atmosphere. "In the abstract, yes," Dumbledore said. "I told myself regularly that when the time was right, I would restructure the arrangements. What I have understood in the past months, in a way I did not understand before, is that I never specified what right would look like. The right time became a perpetual future that required no action in the present." He paused. "That is not a plan to return them. That is a plan to keep them with a story that made the keeping feel temporary." The chamber was very still. Another question: "Did you know that James Potter had begun investigating the proxy arrangements before his death?" "Yes," Dumbledore said. Simply. Without qualification. "I knew. I rerouted his inquiries." The stillness became a different kind of stillness. Did his investigation influence the decision to change the secret keeper? A longer pause this time. The truth bind pushing against whatever part of him wanted to find a different framing. "It was a factor," Dumbledore said. "Not the primary factor. The primary factor was genuinely the security concern. But James was getting closer to a level of documentation that would have been," he stopped. "Problematic. For me." He held the chamber's gaze. "I would like to say that factor was small. I cannot say honestly that it was negligible." The chamber absorbed this in a specific kind of silence that Harry recognized as the silence of a very large number of people updating a very significant prior belief. Fudge, in the ministerial seat, had gone the color of old chalk. He had been increasingly quiet since the tribunal and had today the look of a man who was calculating how much of this would attach to him by proximity and whether there was any seating position far enough away. One more question from the floor: "Do you believe, now, that the prophecy justified what you did?" Dumbledore looked at his hands. Then at the chamber. Then, briefly, at Harry. "No," he said. "I believe the prophecy describes something real, and I believe Harry Potter will face Voldemort, and I believe my concern for the outcome of that confrontation was genuine." A pause. But I also believe that I substituted my own judgment for law, for consent, for the rights of 26 families and 1 child, and told myself it was justified, when the honest answer is that it was convenient. That it allowed me to feel powerful and necessary and correct while doing things I should have known were wrong. He paused again, and the truth bind settled in the silence. I knew they were wrong. I told myself they were necessary. Those are not the same thing, and I knew that too. He looked at Harry across the chamber. I am sorry, he said. And the truth bind was in place, so there was no ambiguity about its quality. It was real, it was total, and it was exactly the size of what it was supposed to cover. Harry looked at Dumbledore across the chamber floor and held the gaze for a moment. He didn't say anything. This was not the moment for his response. That was private, not public, and wouldn't happen today. But he didn't look away either, and he let Dumbledore see whatever Dumbledore needed to see in his face, and after a moment the old man looked back at the chamber with the expression of someone who has set something down after carrying it for a very long time. Marchbanks let the silence run for the length it needed. Then she looked at the session agenda, and at Harry, and said, Lord Potter. The floor is yours if you wish it. Harry stood. He didn't look at his notes. He'd written notes and then put them away because the notes were for preparation and the preparation was done. 3 things, he said. The first is that I want to formally thank the Goblin Nation and the Veela Council. Not procedurally, actually. What happened in this chamber and in the tribunal before it was possible because 2 ancient institutions decided that treaty law meant something and acted accordingly. He looked at Ragnarok, who inclined his head in the specific way that Harry had learned meant more than a conventional nod. He looked at Evangeline Laurent and Apollon Delacour. The Concordat works because they chose to make it work. That should be said on the record. He looked at the chamber. The second is for the 22 lords and ladies who are in this chamber today for the first time in their family's name. He looked at Neville, at Hannah, at Ernie Macmillan and the others, distributed through the lower tier. You are here. That matters. Your families are represented by you, not by a proxy, not by a convenience, but by you. Whatever you do with that, and I hope you do a great deal with it, the fact of it standing is its own thing. He paused. The third is this: what happened here is not finished. The formal proceedings are done, but the reason they needed to happen, the structural conditions that allowed one person to accumulate this much unaccountable authority for 30 years without anyone effectively stopping it, those conditions still exist. No single person should have been able to do what was done. The law should have caught it. The oversight should have worked. The fact that it took a blood test from a 9-year-old and a treaty that hadn't been invoked since 1939 to surface this, he looked at the chamber, at all of it, at the tiers and the portraits and the ancient machinery of wizarding governance, that's what actually needs fixing. Not Dumbledore specifically. The system that made Dumbledore possible. He let that sit. I'm 11 years old, he said. I'll be at school in September. I have a great deal to learn and a significant amount of fairly alarming personal business to sort out, some of which involves Voldemort and soul magic and things I prefer not to have to deal with but am going to deal with anyway. A pause. But I'll be back. And I expect this chamber to have started thinking about structural oversight while I'm gone. He sat down. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then someone in the upper tiers started something that wasn't quite applause. Wisingamot chambers didn't traditionally applaud, but was the wizarding equivalent, which was a sustained formal murmur of assent that rolled through the tiers like a tide and lasted longer than such things usually did. Marchbanks looked at it with the expression of someone who had been running proceedings for 30 years and was willing to let this one run. After the session, in the corridor outside, everything descended into the organized chaos of an ending. The press was there, Rita Skeeter, who Harry had been briefed about and whom he met with the specific preparation of someone who had read her previous work and was not going to give her a single usable quote that he didn't intend, which she found either impressive or infuriating, and it was possible those were the same thing. He gave her the formal statement Pemberton had prepared, thanked her for her interest, and moved on with the efficiency of someone who had learned that certain engagements had a natural terminal point. Amelia Bones found him near the stairs. She was carrying a folder and had the look of someone with a specific purpose. "The Pettigrew prosecution," she said. "We'll need your account of the Gringotts findings for the formal record. Pemberton knows the procedural requirements." "He'll be in touch," Harry said. "Good." She looked at him for a moment. "I want to say, what you said in there, about the structural conditions. The oversight." She paused. "I'll be working on that. Formally, through the department. I want you to know." "I'm glad," Harry said. "And I want you to know that whatever you build, whatever oversight mechanisms, whatever review processes, the Concordat and the Goblin Nation's cooperation are available. Ragnarok will work with you." She looked at him. "You've already spoken to him about this." "Last week," Harry confirmed. A pause. "Right," she said, with the tone of someone resetting their expectations about how far ahead the conversation they were having had already been extended. "Well. Good." She nodded and moved on. Neville appeared at Harry's elbow with Augusta, who had the look of someone who had been watching proceedings with active approval and was ready to deploy it. "You're going to Hogwarts in September," Augusta said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Harry said. "Neville is going in September." She looked at Harry with those sharp eyes. "I expect you'll be in the same year." "Probably," Harry agreed. She studied him for a moment. "You are your father's son," she said, which Harry was still deciding how to respond to when she added, "and your mother's." "In equal measure. The combination is formidable." She nodded once, the full approval nod, the one that meant she'd made a final assessment and it had come out well, and then she moved away, because she was Augusta Longbottom and her work here was done. Neville looked at Harry. "September," he said. "September," Harry agreed. Neville grinned, and it transformed his face into something that had nothing of the anxious careful quality he carried in formal settings, just a genuine uncomplicated anticipation. Harry found, somewhat to his surprise, that he grinned back. Ragnarok found him last, as was probably intentional. The corridor had thinned by then, most people gone or going, the chamber behind them being settled back into its usual configuration by ministry staff. Ragnarok came down the hall with the particular movement of someone who is very old and has no need to hurry because time arranges itself around them rather than the other way around. He looked at Harry and they stood in the corridor together for a moment, and Harry thought about the circular room at Gringotts 14 months ago and a basin of blood-dark water and a quill that had written for nearly 2 minutes, and how what had started as a mandatory procedure under a treaty that most people had forgotten had managed to become everything that had happened since. 22 of the 26 rings are now with their rightful owners, Ragnarok said. The other 4 will follow in the next month as the documentation completes. Good, Harry said. The banking accord accounting is ongoing. The discrepancies in vault management during the proxy period are significant. The full accounting will take another year. Ragnarok's tone was even. The Goblin Nation's claim in that matter will be pursued through standard channels. I'll be available to assist however I can, Harry said. Even from school. I know. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. You said 3 things in the chamber today. There was a 4th thing you didn't say. Harry looked at him. You didn't say anything about Voldemort, Ragnarok said. About the prophecy. About what Flamel told you. About the Horcrux matter. No, Harry agreed. Deliberately. Yes. Harry met Ragnarok's golden eyes. That's not a Wisengamot matter. That's mine. And I'm not going to announce it to a chamber and a press gallery and let it become a public narrative before I've had time to address it properly. He paused. And because if I'd said it today, after everything else, it would have given Dumbledore's justification framework a new set of legs. Suddenly he's not a thief, he's the man who was trying to save Harry Potter from Voldemort. The story would have pivoted. Ragnarok looked at him steadily. You protected the integrity of the proceedings by omission. I protected the truth of the proceedings by not introducing a fact that would have been used to distort it, Harry said. A pause. James Potter, Ragnock said, came to Gringotts 17 times in his adult life. He was always precisely as difficult to work with as his intelligence suggested he would be, and he never apologized for it. He tilted his head. You are considerably more disciplined. He had friends his own age to talk to, Harry said, simply. I had Pemberton. Ragnock made the sound that Harry had learned, over 14 months, was his version of a laugh, not quite a sound that translated directly, but its equivalent. Come and see me next week, he said. Before school preparations consume your calendar entirely. There is a vault you haven't visited yet. Which one? Harry asked. The oldest Potter vault, Ragnock said. The one your father never opened because he hadn't inherited all 4 titles simultaneously. You have. It requires all 4 rings present for the wards to open. He paused. We don't know what's in it. That seems like something worth knowing. Harry looked at his rings. Potter, Peverell, Gryffindor, Ignotus. Next week, he said. Ragnock nodded once, the final kind of nod, and turned back down the corridor toward the ministry floor, and Harry watched him go with the thought that the Goblin King was one of the most genuinely honorable people he'd met, in a year that had been full of people teaching him what honor actually looked like separate from how it was performed. Sirius was waiting outside on the steps, in the February cold that London did with a damp conviction, and he'd gotten them both cups of something from a cart down the street that turned out to be decent tea, which Harry was unreasonably pleased about because he'd been in that chamber for 4 hours and had not had any. He sat on the ministry steps in his formal robes drinking tea and thought about what he'd said in the chamber about being back, and how that wasn't just something to say to make a point. He meant it. He intended it. Penny for them, Sirius said. I was thinking about Hogwarts, Harry said. Good thoughts about Hogwarts, I hope. I was thinking about the fact that I'm going to arrive in September already holding 4 lordships, having just dismantled 30 years of political architecture, and that my defense against the dark arts professor is almost certainly going to try to teach me things I already know. He looked at Sirius. How many consecutive professors has that subject gone through? It's been, not good, Sirius admitted. There's a theory about a curse. There might actually be a curse, Harry said. We should look into it. Sirius looked at him sideways. You've been at school for precisely 0 minutes and you're already planning curriculum improvements. I'm planning to actually learn things, Harry said. Flamel has the theoretical foundations, but there are application gaps in my training. And I've never been around other magical children my age. I need to understand what that dynamic looks like, what they know, how they think. You have Neville, Sirius offered. Neville is one data point. Harry drank his tea. And I need to understand the school as an institution, because Dumbledore is still headmaster pending the governor's review, and I want to know what that means in practice before I walk in. Sirius was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, most 11-year-olds are excited about learning to fly and making friends. I'm excited about learning to fly and making friends, Harry said, honestly. I'm also thinking about what I said in the chamber about structural conditions. Hogwarts is a structure. If there are conditions there that need addressing, I'd like to find them. While also being 11. While also being 11, Harry agreed. I can do both. Sirius looked at him for a moment with an expression that was layered in ways Harry was still developing the vocabulary for, pride and grief and amusement and the specific emotion that he'd come to recognize as the one Sirius felt when he saw Harry doing something James would have done, which was both its own thing and Harry's own thing, which was the right way for it to be. James really would have loved you, Sirius said. You've said that before, Harry said. It keeps being true, Sirius said, simply. Harry finished his tea and set the cup on the step beside him and looked out at the grey London street and the Muggle world moving through it with its complete indifference to everything that had happened in the building behind them. 14 months. 26 lordships. Sirius free. Peter found. Dumbledore's architecture dismantled, one documented stone at a time. An ICW filing pending. A vault no one had opened in centuries waiting for next week. 6 Horcruxes and a prophecy and a war somewhere in the future that was real and that he wasn't going to pretend wasn't coming. And school in September, with its moving staircases and breathing magic and the chance, for the first time in his life, to simply be somewhere he belonged. Sirius, he said. When we go to Hogwarts in September, I want to go on the train. Sirius looked at him. You want to go on the Hogwarts Express? With everyone else. From King's Cross. Through the barrier. He paused. Like a normal student. Sirius held his gaze for a moment and then said, carefully, you are the least normal student Hogwarts has ever seen. I know, Harry said. I want to go on the train anyway. A pause. Platform 9 3/4, Sirius said. September 1st. You'll have to buy an owl. I've been thinking about an owl, Harry said. Of course you have, Sirius said, which was not a criticism, and Harry knew it wasn't. Fleur found him 20 minutes later, while Sirius had gone back inside to finalize something with Ragnarok's team and Harry was still on the steps with the cold air and the empty teacup. She sat down beside him without preamble, in the full Veela Council formal robes that she hadn't changed out of, and looked at the street with him for a moment. The ICW filing goes in next week, she said. Lauren has the timing coordinated. Good, Harry said. It will be different from this, she said. The ICW is Dumbledore's strongest ground. The allies there are more entrenched, the institutional loyalty is older. It will take longer. I'll be at school, Harry said. But I'll be available. Ragnarok has a communication method that works anywhere. Fleur glanced at him. You've been running this from Grimmauld Place for over a year. Now you'll be running it from a dormitory. I've been running it from wherever I happen to be, Harry said. The location changes. The work doesn't. She looked at him for a moment with those gray-silver eyes, and the expression on her face was the layered one she got when she was thinking several things and selecting what to say. You said something in the chamber, she said. About the system that made Dumbledore possible. About structural conditions. Yes. The Veela Council has been saying that for 40 years about the ICW, she said. About the structures there that allow a single sufficiently prestigious figure to effectively direct its agenda. We've been saying it and being ignored or managed or dismissed. She paused. When you said it today, in that chamber, in that specific way, the weight of it was different. Because of who it came from, Harry said. Because of what you just demonstrated, she corrected. There's a difference. You didn't say it and expect to be believed. You said it having already shown it was possible to do something about it. She looked at the street. That matters more than I can explain. Harry thought about this. The Council's work at the ICW, the blocks they've hit, the access problems, the things Dumbledore filtered. Once the ICW filing is active, those get addressed as part of the same proceeding. Several of them, yes. And after, he said. After the ICW case, what does the Council want to build? Long term. She looked at him. I'm asking seriously, he said. Not as a diplomatic question. What does your council actually want the international magical structure to look like? Fleur was quiet for a moment, and Harry could see her deciding whether to give him the formal answer or the real one. She gave him the real one. Distributed authority, she said. A structure where no single nation's representative, human, goblin, Veela, or otherwise, can set the agenda alone. Where treaty agreements between all peoples have genuine enforcement mechanisms rather than courtesy provisions that get ignored when they're inconvenient. She paused. Where a child's blood test cannot be the only thing standing between justice and 30 years of fraud. Harry looked at her. That's a significant project. Yes, she said. I'll still be at school. You'll be at school for 7 years, she said, dryly. You managed a year of this from a house in Surrey. I think you'll manage the ICW follow-through from Hogwarts. Harry almost laughed, which was the closest she'd come to getting one out of him in formal circumstances, and she clearly knew it, because something in her expression shifted into the nearest thing to satisfied. When I come back from school, he said, and when the ICW case is resolved, I want to understand the Veela Council's full structural proposal. The detailed version. Not the formal version. You're planning for after, she said. I'm planning while I can, he said. That's all planning ever is. He looked at the street. I'm going to have a few years where most of my attention is on the Horcrux problem and school and not being 17 before I have to be. But the work here, he gestured back at the ministry building, isn't done. You said it yourself. He's not the last person who'll try to build something like that. The conditions still exist. They do, Fleur said. So we keep working, Harry said. Slowly, if we have to. In parallel with everything else. Fleur looked at him for a moment. The grey-silver of her eyes in the winter light had the quality it got when she'd made a decision about something. You know, she said, when I first came to that meeting at Gringotts, the first one, with the blood test, I thought you were going to be a project. Something the council was attaching itself to for leverage. And? Harry said. And then you were just, she paused, as though selecting the word carefully, real. In a way that was inconvenient for the project framework. Harry looked at her. Inconvenient how? Because projects don't ask what the council actually wants. She said it simply. Projects don't think about the structural conditions that make projects necessary. Projects don't plan for after. A pause. People do. Harry held her gaze for a moment. There was something in the air between them that was different from the working relationship they'd built over 14 months, something that was adjacent to all of that but occupying its own space, and Harry was 11 years old and she was 14 and neither of them said anything about it, because some things were allowed to simply be present without needing to be named yet. We're going to be working together for a long time, he said. Yes, Fleur said. I think we are. The sun was moving toward the western buildings by the time Sirius came back out, and Harry was cold in a productive way, the way you're cold when you've been sitting still long enough that the cold is telling you something. Fleur had gone back inside 20 minutes ago. Harry had been sitting with the street and the empty cup and the particular quality of an ending that isn't actually an ending, the kind that's just the visible join between one chapter and the next. Sirius sat down beside him, and there was something different in his posture today, something that had been building across the months and was particularly clear now, a man getting his weight back. Not just physical, though that too, month by month, but the specific weight of someone who had been convinced by 11 years of darkness that they had nothing and were nothing, who was slowly remembering that both of those were lies. Ragnarok says next Thursday for the vault, Sirius said. Good, Harry said. Miriam Clearwater says the ICW filing confirmation came through while we were inside. Formal acknowledgement received. Good, Harry said again. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then, how do you feel? Harry thought about it. Not the quick answer, the real one. Like there's a lot more to do, he said. And like, he paused, looking for the precise word, like the ground is solid. Like I'm standing on something that was built right. Which I haven't felt before. He looked at his rings. 4 of them. I feel like myself, he said. Which sounds simple but isn't. Sirius looked at him. No, he said quietly. It's not simple at all. They sat on the ministry steps in the February cold and the early going dark, and the ordinary world moved around them with its ordinary traffic, and somewhere in the building behind them the last of the formal records were being sealed and entered and made permanent, and 23 people who hadn't known what they were beginning to understand it, and one man who had known precisely what he was doing was sitting with what that knowledge cost him now, and the world was not fixed, it was never simply fixed, but it was different than it had been. 14 months ago Harry had been in a garden pulling weeds and a letter had arrived on a Tuesday. He thought about that boy, in the garden, handing the calling card to his uncle with the grass stains on his knees. He didn't feel distant from him the way you feel distant from someone you used to be. He felt connected to him, the same person, continuous, not transformed but extended. Everything that boy had been was still here. He'd just been given the room to grow into it. "All right," he said. He stood up, which meant Sirius stood up too. "Let's go home." Sirius stood. He looked at Harry for a moment with the expression that had all the layers in it, and then he put a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, just a moment, just enough, and said, "Yeah. Let's go home." They walked down the ministry steps together, into the grey London street, into the ordinary world that didn't know and wouldn't know until it needed to, and the cold air moved around them, and the city went about its business, and the ground was solid under their feet. 3 weeks later, in the oldest Potter vault, by the light of 4 rings blazing simultaneously at the discovery of something that had been waiting centuries for the right heir, Harry Potter laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, delighted, and the sound of it echoed off the ancient stone walls and came back to him doubled, which seemed about right.